Early in 2022, I decided to start looking into Aldous Huxley and his book, Brave New World. I must confess, I've never read his books. That isn't what interested me. I wanted to understand why someone could write books about things that happened nearly 100 years after they'd written the initial book. I realised after a short space of time that I'd opened a door into a secret world. Not just the world of Aldous Huxley, but the world of his whole family. In this presentation, we will be looking at the highly influential, multi-generational Huxley family. This series will be called The Huxleys' Brave New World Order. This is the first in the series, and this one's called Echoes of the Huxleys. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Lorraine for her help in the information gathering stages of the Huxley investigations and the constant read-throughs she helped me with. Please remember that this is only the introduction. This is not a complete deep dive into the Huxley family. That will come in future presentations. As always though, we will only use information taken from the mainstream public domain. Just who are these flockers?
Today, we are faced, I think, with the approach of what may be called the ultimate revolution, the final revolution, where a man can act directly on the mind-body of his fellows. Well, needless to say, some kind of direct action on human mind-bodies has been going on since the beginning of time. But this has generally been of a violent nature. The techniques of terrorism have been known from time immemorial, and people have employed them with more or less ingenuity, sometimes with the utmost crudity, sometimes with a good deal of skill acquired by a process of trial and error, finding out what the best ways of using torture, imprisonment, constraints of various kinds. But as I think it was Metternich said many years ago, you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. That if you are going to control any population for any length of time, you must have some measure of consent. It's exceedingly difficult to see how pure terrorism can function indefinitely. It can function for a fairly long time, but I think sooner or later you have to bring in an element of persuasion, an element of getting people to consent to what is happening to them. Well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude, love their servitude, love their servitude.
Welcome to this new Sheep Farm Meet the Flockers podumentary presentation. This is the first in the series called The Huxleys, Brave New World Order, and this is part 1, Echoes of the Huxleys. Part 1 is an introduction of sorts, and not specifically just about the Huxleys, rather the synchronicities and links back to the various Huxleys. And you'll see this as we go through it. Giving examples of academic nepotism that is used to control us, the Goyim. The Huxleys are a British family and a who's who of British academic society. Many of its family members have excelled in science, medicine, the arts, journalism and literature. The family includes members who have occupied senior positions in politics, the BBC, and NGOs like the World Wildlife Fund or UNESCO, and the intelligence services. To the public, the Huxleys are probably an underestimated lineage that hide behind the famous shadow of author Aldous Huxley. However, the patriarch of the family was biologist, anthropologist, zoologist, anatomist known as Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Henry Huxley. Thomas Huxley was born in 1825 and died in 1895 and was right there at the epicenter of the academic and financial reset which occurred sometime in the mid-1800s when they were discussing evolution and eugenics theories that have continued to haunt and shape our lives ever since. His grandsons were Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World and The Doors of Perception, and Aldous's elder brother was Sir Julian Huxley, who was another evolutionary biologist. He was the president of the British Eugenics Society and first director of UNESCO, and co-founder of the World Wildlife Fund, and the man who invented transhumanism. In fact, he coined the term. His other grandson was Sir Andrew Huxley, and he was a Nobel laureate physiologist. In this introduction, we will show examples of other academic dynasties and other information that is intertwined with the Huxley story. In the coming series, we'll dissect the Huxley family tree, covering generations of Huxleys who have changed the way we live. And lastly, we will cover Thomas Huxley, Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley, and Andrew Huxley in detail. There is no doubt that the Brave New World prophecies are in evidence today, playing out on the human population. Brave New World certainly epitomises the situation we're facing now. As I say in Yorkshire, it was bang on the money. This research was like walking into a spider's web. It was right there in front of my eyes, or our eyes, but we only ever see it at the last millisecond before we walk into it. That's how close we are to the truth, and that's how close we need to get to the truth. What this Huxley research has done, for me, and I hope for you guys as well, is reaffirm the mosaic's pattern, making the picture clearer. So we can then visually see the strands in the fabric within the tapestry of the matrix. We're then looking right through the veil covering their lie of our reality. The problem is, we cannot yet decipher the code. It's there though, just like the spider's web, but it's a web of deceit. What we're seeing are the matrix's zeros and ones, and that's what the Huxley dynasty is. They are the zeros and ones. They are the living matrix. Joining me tonight, as usual, is our Chris. How are you doing?
Good evening. You all right?
Evening, yes.
Very well.
What would you say to that intro, Chris? I know it was quite long.
That's a good intro. It's nice, that far.
Yeah. It sort of gets the sort of juices flowing to what are sort of uncovered and linked together. And when we've been talking about it, we've also found new bits of information that are intertwined in the Huxley story.
I like the use of the word podumentary.
Podumentary.
But you tried docu-podcast, but that wasn't quite as catchy.
No, docu-podcast.
You love making words up, don't you?
I don't think I made that up, to be fair, Chris. I think it's out there. No, I think it's out there, mate. I thought I had, but I've probably heard it somewhere else. So, first question to you. Before I started going on about this, what did you know about the Huxleys prior to me starting this research back in January 2021?
I reckon they first came on my radar, probably not even at school, because I was too thick to read a book like Brave New World, I would say. It was probably around when the film came out, the Doors film. Do you remember that? Because I remember a lot of people were carrying that book around with them because they'd watched the Doors film, then they'd gone back and listened to Doors. Yeah. Found out, because I remember they re-released the book, The Doors of Perception, with Jim Morrison on the front, but it was Val Kilmer because it was to promote the film, if you remember.
Yeah.
And then people started saying, "Oh, have you read this book? It's this guy who took acid and blah blah." And I never read it myself, Doors of Perception.
Right.
And then I went on to read Brave New World when I got a bit older. Read that a few times.
So that was around, and you're talking of around when you were at college, around the second
90s.
Summer of Love era.
Just after, yeah.
Just
like,
after.
So the Summer of Love had happened. All the acid stuff had come out, you know.
Yeah.
And then it kind of continued into the 90s, I'd say, wouldn't you? The Summer of Love kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, with ecstasy, I suppose, then, after acid were a big thing.
Yeah.
But it kind of continued. And I think people, I don't remember when that film came out. I'm guessing that film came out in the 90s, early 90s.
Yeah.
But then I remember I was in London in, like 1991. And I remember someone had that book then.
Right.
So that's when Aldous Huxley first came on my radar. First time I'd heard of him. Yeah. I think it was about 1991. So
it's sort of reinserted back into popular culture due to the second Summer of Love, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, he was behind promoting the first Summer of Love, and then they went on to bring the Summer of Love back again, didn't they? And even used the same name, and as we're going to talk about, the same imagery, which was the Smiley Face.
Smiley Face. And also, I mean, acid music. I mean, it was actually called acid music, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, they weren't hiding it this time. It weren't. I mean, I'm not saying they did it in the 60s, but they certainly weren't hiding it. And it were mainly this country as well. So this country got hit, and
We kicked it off.
Yeah, and a lot of the major DJ stars.
I think it even started up north, didn't it? I think it was.
No, I think the
northern clubs were more famous.
They were popping up all over. I think the illegal parties, but
service stations, all that.
Yeah, I think Danny Rampling, who's obviously talking out about the whole nonsense now, he was part of one of the main DJs at that.
Well, I started going clubbing in the early 90s, so just after that, so I was only like 17, 16.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, well, even the acid ones, when you think about that, so you've got all these guys going to a field or whatever, taking drugs that they don't know what they've got, where they've even come from, on a which was similar again to the 60s, apparently.
Yeah.
On a strip, and then they play music, trance music.
Yes.
Probably even harder core than they were in the 60s, because it's actually mind-bending trance music.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to guinea pig a load of people,
give them a load of acid.
Different kinds of acid.
And give them music called trance.
Trance, and bleeps, and I mean, you remember the footage from the 80s, you were like, what the hell is going on there?
Yeah.
And then it kind of continued with ecstasy, didn't it? Where if you think of a club where they had, when those clubs became super clubs, it were clearly the drugs were controlled, weren't they? They were.
Yes.
They were controlled by certain people. So they'd give the drugs out with certain symbols on them as well. God knows what they meant at the time.
Yeah.
And then certain I mean, what a way. I mean, if you're watching a reaction of what happens to people, it's like a bloody
fishbowl.
A test lab, isn't it?
Yeah. But most of those ecstasy tablets, and we're going to talk about that further on, but most of those ecstasy tablets were coming in from from Holland, I do believe, Amsterdam.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And so they were coming from one area. So, all right, they were drug dealers, but they had to get the raw materials from somewhere. And so these people were allowed to function and then import all these things. And like the first Summer of Love, where it were all peace and love, after a year, it became a drugs war. And people were getting whacked and all sorts of stuff in this country. And there were lots of violence, weren't there?
The manufacturing of those products, the acid tabs, that's a scientific endeavour. It's not just someone doing it in a bedroom, is it?
No, it isn't. No. And you only need to change, I would have thought, part of that ingredient list to make that acid tab to send people gaga. Bear in mind, in the late 80s, 90s, that technology were then 60, 70 years old. So they probably got them chemicals down to a fine art, hadn't they? That the new 25 years later, what them people who did all that were going to become.
Yeah.
That experiment had already been done. You know, they've been testing it on military people for years. So, but I mean, out of that came stuff like Blur and Oasis, and well, the Manchester Sound were before that. So all these things that were, I mean, Mark Devlin will know this better than us, but all these orchestrated events that looked organic, now looking back, don't seem as organic, do they?
No, I mean, I think I started going clubbing before you did.
You did.
But you felt like you were part of a movement, didn't you? A rebel.
Yes.
Even.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing they did in the 60s.
You were guinea pigs, really.
Well, you're actually probably guinea pigs, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what I think with the drug? They used to call it the drug scene, ironically. But I think with the drug scene, if you think what that would do, right? Let's just say somebody took a drug, whatever it would be, and then they're dancing for 2 hours. Instantly, you're automatically turned on that pharmaceuticals work.
Well, yeah,
even though they're illegal. Yeah,
you're popping a pill, aren't you?
Yeah. So you're automatically. I look at it a bit like some mates who took steroids when they were training. Same thing. They're injecting things, so injections work. It's that mind. Anybody looking at a bodybuilder who trains putting 3 stone of muscle on competing in Mr. Olympia. It's an advertisement that drugs work.
Yeah. Another, just on a slightly parallel subject, I've always thought, for instance, in the 80s, if you think, Scarface, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone wanted to be Tony Montana, even though he's an evil, horrible bastard. But look how they glamorized cocaine fire. And that was basically an advert for cocaine.
Yes. Yeah.
And there were a few other films like that. But that more than any, I think, was literally an advertisement. Written by Oliver Stone, by the way.
Well, again,
written by written by Oliver Stone, who also directed The Doors.
Yeah. Well, does it surprise us that these things come back round? And also, out of that came the grunge movement, which, that again, it came after the 60s Summer of Love, where it sort of went really dark and horrible. This is not about the first Summer of Love, by the way. What we're looking at here is where the researchers taken me anyway, and then me and Chris had had a conversation, and he said, well, it links to that as well. And the Huxleys were brought back in, or Aldous Huxley's books were brought back into society.
Yeah, that's
and
what
the Doors were brought back in to that generation again for some reason, and acid and all these other things. So it regurgitated back round again for a second hit.
Yeah.
And so Nirvana then took the dirtier side, and obviously
that's where all that emo
heroin
music came from, didn't it?
Yeah,
that emotional, like greasy flick,
depressing,
hanging down. Have you always have you noticed the logo for Nirvana?
Go on.
It's the smiley face as we're talking, and it's got. I only noticed this the other day. It's got crossed eyes and its tongue hanging out like it's dead.
Yeah. Well, does that really surprise you?
What happened to old Kurt Cobain? I mean, all they had to do was put a blooming chunkness outside of his head.
Yeah, and it had a blood spot on it, didn't it?
Has it got a blood spot on it?
I think one of them's. No, that's the Watchman that you talked about earlier. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that because the smiley face is quite an interesting one. And you also had Forrest Gump going through the 60s.
Yeah. Well, they made out in the Forrest Gump film that he invented the smiley face, didn't they?
Yeah, when he wiped his
He's
face on
doing
that.
that run, he wipes his face,
Yeah.
and it's got it on it. Quite funny, but again, brought back again and again the old smiley face. And one of the main links we had or thought of, I think Mark mentioned this in his book, is the smiley face in old Watchman.
Yeah.
And that came out, if I remember, because I was a big comic fan, still am actually, but like 1987, I think it was, 86, 87, it was written as a series. I think I bought it in 1988, 89, I reckon.
Right.
And that re-brought the smiley face back again for the... I mean, I'm sure it was responsible partly because it was everywhere. And then it came back for the second Summer of Love.
So it's strange that you've got acid, which adopts the smiley face. You've got grunge, Nirvana, that adopts the smiley face. And a few years before acid, more or less the same time, you've got Alan Moore writing a comic that adopts the smiley face, that becomes the face of acid. All organic, Chris.
Yeah, it must be.
All
and then
organic.
You've got Alan Moore, who's a known Crowleyite, dark
Yeah.
occultist, magician.
Yeah.
But yeah, to be fair, his comic books are amazing, to be honest with you. I was crazy about all his stuff. I've got a lot of his comics. He wrote one, I don't know if I forgot to mention this to you, he wrote one of the last ones I bought, 'cause I don't buy so many anymore, and it's called Necromicon, and it's literally about H.P. Lovecraft and the coming of a demon coming, basically, to run the world, kind of thing. Quite a dark, very dark comic, quite graphic as well.
Well, you've just mentioned someone there who is also intrinsically linked to the Huxleys, H.P. Lovecraft.
Right, yeah.
Shares a similar bloodline.
Another name.
He's
another fella who's constantly dragged up and kept relevant over and over again, I think. I mean, I've got his book, all his writings there. I've read a couple of his stories, and they're pretty good. But he's definitely someone who gets attention for attention.
He's lauded as the king of sci-fi, isn't he?
Horror, I'd say.
Horror, is it horror?
Yeah, he's more horror. I mean, they did a series recently about Lovecraft, and I never watched it, but I think it was called Lovecraft, Land of Lovecraft or something, I think.
Right.
I can't remember what it was. It was a TV series, but I'm not massive familiar with his stuff, but he's always dragged back out again, like these people always are.
Well, just to go back through Alan Moore and his comics, he's a comic writer, novelist, short story writer, musician and cartoonist. He's also a magician and dark occultist, a Crowleyite. Moore actually is a ceremonial magician of ritual magic, high magic, or learned magic, popularised by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Moore wrote V for Vendetta and The Watchman, and he used... what was the character, Chris, who used a smiley face?
The comedian in the comic of The Watchman, he wears a badge, a smiley face badge.
Right.
And the way it was used in the comic was it had a blood splat on it. And the blood splat, if you remember the cover of The Watchman, I'm sure everyone's seen it somewhere in the back of their head. It had a blood splat. Well, it was made into a film, wasn't it? It had a blood splat, but the blood splat was basically showing the doomsday clock.
Right.
So it was 5 to 12. And
it's going to be very interesting how this sort of comes back full circle again from that, what you've just mentioned there. Yeah. Yeah, I was thrown from a hotel, blood splat, smiley face.
Well, I didn't mention that bit. The way that the blood splat ends up on the smiley face is he's thrown from his apartment window onto the pavement. And then in the comic, obviously shows him land, shows him drop. And then, to signify his death is the smiley face with the blood splat showing the doomsday clock. And all the way through the comic, it comes up again and again, and it shows it getting closer to midnight, basically. Because I don't know if anyone's seen The Watchmen, it's about the slow build up to the nuclear bomb dropping.
Right. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the Huxleys yet. I mean, we're obviously showing links here that their tentacles, if you like, or their energy or what their work has bled through or filtered through into other people's work. And a quote from Alan Moore said he had a documentary called The Mindscape of Alan Moore. I don't know if you've seen it.
I saw it. I probably saw it when it came out, that fact, because I was so into that.
2003. He said, LSD was an incredible experience. Not that I'm recommending it for anybody else. Well, you just have. But for me, it's kind of, it hammered home to me that reality was not a fixed thing. That the reality that we saw about us every day was one reality and a valid one, but there were others, different perspectives, where different things have meaning that were just as valid, that had a profound effect on me. Bear in mind now, this is coming from a dark occultist, a magician, and a ceremonial magician of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, saying that. It's not just about somebody having a trip, is it?
No. What do you think? Are you implying that he's a bad guy?
I don't know. I don't know what a bad guy is anymore, Chris. Because these people are writing things that we enjoy, doing things we enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, is it another hero you got to throw out the window? Because I like Almo, and he's a very intelligent guy when you listen to him talking.
Are all these people intelligent?
Yeah, I mean, is he a pawn in it? One thing I do find
I'm sure Ted Bundy were intelligent.
One thing I always found interesting about Almo, he's quite vocal about the fact that his comics got turned into films because DC owned them, and he didn't get any money for it, and he always denounces the comic, which is fair enough. But then From Hell, which I think was independently published, and that got turned into a film, and he denounced that as well. But then you think, but you had not control, but you must have chose to sell that to a...
Didn't we hear all this with like Prince and George Michael, who said, when I own my own music and I can write what I want, I'll write stuff that I want. And when
Prince kind of did, didn't he? To be fair.
Well, I don't know. They all sounded the same to me. But when George Michael did it, he did it where he were dressed as a copper going into a men's toilet. You know what I mean? It was just like...
it sounded the same as well, didn't it?
Yeah, it just sounded exactly the same.
To be fair, Prince kind of went off on his own, didn't he?
I don't know. I'm not saying I didn't. I like Prince, but I'm not saying it sounded right lot different from when he were Prince or Symbol.
Yeah.
So,
but it's just an interesting side note that, I mean, I'm sure everyone's seen V for Vendetta fight. That mask, that V mask, is literally used for the, what will they call that movement? They call them that, definitely a dodgy.
Yeah.
Do you remember them ones? What are they called?
I don't know, but
you know what I mean, don't
they used them on London Bridge and stuff like that, didn't they?
Yeah, they were basically fight the power kind of characters.
Yeah.
I mean, that looked like a stage nonsense to me, to be honest.
But I mean, V for Vendetta, I mean, we talk about Huxley's work and Orwell's and people like that. V for Vendetta were just as bang on the money.
Yeah, it's up there, isn't it? Yeah, it's brilliant comic that is, by the way.
Yeah.
I wasn't so keen on the film when it came out, but because I was a bit of a comic snob. But as I got older, the film's actually pretty... The Wachowskis produced it, I believe. You know, the Matrix guys produced it.
Right.
Or girls, turning to girls on the pair of them.
Have they? Honestly?
Yeah. Did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, one of them's transgendered into a woman, and then the other one did.
Good for him.
Pair of brothers. Maybe we should do that.
I don't think that's going to happen, Chris.
Dominique.
Christine and Dominique. Yeah. I might not have a smiley face anymore. Talking of a smiley face, I just want to do a bit of background on the smiley face, because it was quite interesting when we started talking about this, actually. And it was quite accidental that we started talking about it. But then we realised it was used for acid, and the links to acid and LSD and Aldous Huxley, well, they can't get any stronger. A smiley, sometimes referred to as a smiley face, was first drawn by Harvey Ross Ball, who was an American commercial artist. Ball never applied for a trademark for the iconic smiley image and only earned $45 for his efforts. He designed the smiley in 1963, a year that strange coincidences happened, which we'll get onto later. And the smiley would go on to be the symbol of the second summer of love in 88 to 89, as well as all the other things we've just discussed. The smiley story goes that the State Mutual Life Assurance Company of Worcester, sounds exciting, Massachusetts, now known as Hanover Insurance, they've jazzed it up a bit, had purchased the Guarantee Mutual Company of Ohio. The merger resulted in low employee morale. Maybe a name change would have worked. In an attempt to solve this, Mr. Ball was employed in 1963 as a freelance artist to come up with an image to increase morale. Ball started with a sunny yellow circle containing a smile. However, he wasn't happy that it could be turned upside down to make a frown. By adding two eyes, one slightly bigger than the other, like mine, he created a smiley face. So that's the story behind...
I never realised it had one eye bigger than the other.
Well, the original one has.
Right.
The ones that have been... The ones that trademark now haven't.
Right.
So they sort of slightly tweaked it here and there. I don't think the Acid House one has either.
No.
We'll come on to the company in a sec. It's also that Homer Simpson yellow in it.
Yeah. Which
Which
isn't
again,
used broadly, is it? Only for certain things.
Only for certain things. But again, the Homer Simpson thing, we were talking about this the other day, which again Huxley comes into as part of the human potential movement. How and the Esalen Institute that he was part of as well. The human potential movement, where they absolutely ruined family values, if you like, and so Homer Simpson and all these other characters have been used to destroy the male.
Well, I mean, when you think about the Simpsons, making blokes look stupid, look where we are now,
I know.
By 2023, I mean,
I know.
I don't know where we are.
No, I don't know where we are. Well, you just mentioned two guys who make films who you've seen interviewed over the years, the Wazowskis, who didn't look like women or bis or anything. They didn't speak like that. They never mentioned it once. And
one
now...
of them's transformed quite a while ago, actually, quite a long time, and then the other one followed.
Right.
But they've made some interesting films in that world.
But again, if everybody's a Manchurian candidate, if all these people are Manchurian candidates, and we've explained again, that's all part of the MK Ultra thing. That's all part of the Huxley thing, the Tavistock thing. It's all Tavistock that's doing the sex changes and things like that. All of it's intertwined with this, and then they're into films and making films about.
Well, you do wonder, don't you? Like the Matrix clearly had a lot of stuff in it. I mean, you can't even begin to talk about that. But then they did V for Vendetta, like I said, they produced it, I believe, and they also did Cloud Atlas, which is a heavy film. I've read the book of that actually. The book's amazing. Yeah. The film's good, really good as well. But it's clearly pointing at all kinds of stuff, reincarnation. It's got karma. It's got everything in it. And then you think that. I think if I'm right, their films are Warner Brothers, and you think I think we've mentioned this before. That Time Warner. Why are they called Time Warner? Yeah. Are they the good? A warning in time. Guys? Are they warning you of the time? I don't know. I'm talking, but
I don't know. Again, you don't know.
I'm not saying good bad guy. I don't know. But what I mean is, are they part of a faction? And they can't do anything, but they're warning us. Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers.
Maybe they think they're warning us. I don't know.
Who knows? Or maybe it's just revelation of the method, even more so that,
Yeah. I would say they're all probably part of some sort of cult, different cults coming together. The Smiley was introduced to France. I like it when they talk about, this was from Wikipedia, by the way, this bit. It was introduced to France. So why was it introduced to France in 1972? As a signal of a good news story in the newspaper François. Frenchman Franklin Lufrane used the image and trademarked the image. So it weren't trademarked before. He trademarked it. Today, Nicholas Lufrane, the CEO of the Smiley Company, the global business behind one of the biggest licensing success stories of the past 50 years. It is a brand licensing company based in London. It holds the rights to the Smiley Face in over 100 countries. The Smiley brand has revenues in 2020 of $538 million.
Bloody hell. I bet that other guy's popular with his family.
He's passed away now, him. I don't think he was short of a bob, to be fair to him, but so, I mean, we were discussing the Smileys, and it led us into another. I think your missus said this, that she said, well, the Smileys are part of the emoji explosion.
No, well, it wasn't that. She just literally said, that's like, because I was telling her what we were talking about. She said, that's literally the original emoji, isn't it? Yeah. Just in a passing comment. And it is, isn't it? Yeah, same colour.
Yeah. She does have her uses.
Yeah. Not just football.
But yeah. So the emojis are part of another phenomenon developed in the 90s by a Japanese interface designer, Shigetaka Kurita. I didn't do too bad with that one, Chris.
Didn't do too bad there, yeah.
Often cited for his early work with emoji sets. He was part of a team that created one of the first emojis used solely for communication, the first being a heart-shaped pictogram that appeared on the NTT Docomo pager aimed at teenagers. Interesting. Right. Heart-shaped, yeah. It went on to become the red heart emoji. So that was the first one. The Docomo emoji set he created is now on display at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. That's how important it is. The idea of the Museum of Modern Art, by the way, was developed in 1929 by Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, wife of John D. Rockefeller Jr.
A little side project for his missus.
Little side project, yes. NTT Docomo Incorporated. Docomo meaning everywhere in Japanese, and is a Japanese mobile phone operator owned by the giant Nippon Telegraph and Telephone Corporation, or NTT, which was operated by AT&T during the occupation of Japan after the war, and is ranked 55th in the Fortune Global 500, valued at $107 billion. The smiley was amongst the first set of 176 coloured emojis called the grinning face.
Right.
Which leads you into the clowns and Nephilim.
Sounds a bit more sinister, the grinning face, doesn't it? Than
yes.
Smiley.
Yeah. Listen to this though, Chris. Interestingly, AT&T morphed from a company Alexander Graham Bell set up with his even more interesting father-in-law, a man called Gardiner Green Hubbard, an American financier. In 1899, the Bell Telephone Company became AT&T. Bell and Green were also pioneers of wax-coated cardboard cylinders and discs, first used on graphophones, I presume are similar to gramophones. This company would go on to become Columbia Records.
Oh, ISIS Records.
ISIS Records.
Yeah.
Now owned by Sony Music Entertainment, a subsidiary of Sony Corporation, America, with a market capitalization of 120 billion. We're talking about the biggest corporations here, pumping out emojis, smiley faces for a mutual assurance company.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you just thought there was something that your phone had
put just appeared on your phone.
Yeah.
Well, where do we actually think these things come from?
Yeah, you don't realise it.
You don't realise, do you? It was strange, Chris, because we read a book, right, called The Carnivals of Life and Death by James Shelby Downard. Remember that book? Yeah. We got it from Crow 777. He talked about Graham Shelby and Ilana Freeland and Michael Hoffman. They talk about James Shelby Downard. I think Michael Hoffman wrote a book with James Shelby Downard, and I think Ilana Freeland did some writing and ghostwriting or editing for some of the books. Anyway, the young Downard claims he saw Alexander Graham Bell involved in sex magic rituals on Jekyll Island. You remember that part?
Yeah, I remember that bit, yeah. Bloody crazy, that book, isn't it?
Absolutely crazy. I recommend reading it.
Carnivals of Life and Death. Did you mention that?
Yeah, Carnivals of Life and Death.
It's bonkers. I mean, I wonder if it's actually, is it true or is it written in code or what is it?
I don't know. But there's some bonkers stories in that. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that book within this a couple of times, not within this one, but further on in the other parts, right. Because there's a part in that book, and I know we're just moving off a little bit, that he talks about crockery being made out of bone china.
Yeah.
And the Masons use human bones as part of a ritual.
Yeah.
Well,
is that
the
really
Huxleys? The Huxleys.
China came from?
It were made out of animal bones, but they introduced human bones in it. But the Huxleys are married into and related into the Wedgwoods,
the famous potteries company, Stoke-on-Trent,
that were Quakers.
Was it Stoke-on-Trent?
That were Quakers that set up a. We're going to come into this as well. That set up a group called the Lunar Society.
Right.
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic, actually. Anyway, so we've got two mentions now of sex magic people, or ritual magic, or whatever you want to call it, within this, in the first...
Well, occult spinnings, I'd say, aren't they?
Yeah, occult spinnings within the first hour. Graham Bell was definitely an active Freemason. I think he was part of a lodge called Harmony Lodge number 17. And one of his friends was a Grand Master. I've been trying to dig out his friend's name, but I can only get the first name, so I'm not even going to say it. AT&T are also a part of the military intelligence industrial establishment. For instance, Room 641A, sounds sinister, is a telecommunication interception facility operated by AT&T for the US NSA, or National Security Agency, as part of its warrantless surveillance program as authorized by the Patriot Act. And the New York Times has reported that AT&T is selling personal customer information to the CIA. And these are mainstream stories. Alexander Bell was an honorary president of the Second International Eugenics Congress, in 1921, and a proponent of eugenics. Now remember, Sir Julian Huxley was president of the British Eugenics Society, and the Huxleys, as we shall see, are also intermarried with the Darwins and the Galtons. So they're right in basically the invention of eugenics or genetics.
Even before old Hitler got involved.
Yeah. So the Smiley Face is linked with the Second Summer of Love from 88 to 89, where people were again drugged out their heads, this time on MDMA, known as ecstasy. So they're even calling something like, they've got Smiley Face for acid, and they're calling this ecstasy. So again, it's that.
Where did ecstasy? Was it a bit later? Was it like 90s? Again in 90s?
Late 80s. I think 80s, mate. It were 80s.
Late 80s.
Late 80s. Yeah.
I remember that period of time because I remember ecstasy tablets at that time. Not that I took loads, but they were 20 quid a pop.
Right.
Going back to early 90s.
Right. I don't think I don't know what price they are now, but I bet they're not 20 quid a pop now.
No, what I'm saying is on the relevance of inflation or whatever, how much is that in today's money? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I reckon they were probably a lot stronger then than they are now.
Yeah.
A lot more watered down and toxic probably now as well. Whether they were toxic or not, I'm not saying they were one of your 5 a day, but so when you look at this, what was the Second Summer of Love organic or another Tavistock controlled event, as in the First Summer of Love?
I think, going on what I know now, I would say it was an orchestrated event.
Yeah, I would as well. MDA was first developed in 1912 by German pharmaceutical company Merck. It was used in the 1970s to enhance psychotherapy and became a popular street drug in the 1980s. Is this Huxley's Soma?
Right, yeah. Well, I would think his Soma would be prescribed. I wouldn't think it would be a street drug.
Well, it could be both, couldn't it?
Yeah.
It could be, because obviously he did say basically, we're going to drug you out of your mind and you'll be happy, which is what Klaus Schwab's saying, you will own nothing and be happy.
What better way to do it, Fatty? You've got people who won't take pharmaceuticals. Those people are the kind of people that will probably take recreational drugs. So you're covering all bases, aren't
you? Yeah. I found this bit interesting. The Merck Group, commonly known as Merck, is a German multinational science and technology company headquartered in Darmstadt with about 60,000 employees, and in present, it's in 66 countries. Just smack me around the face with it. Yeah.
It just makes you wonder, is it like 64 countries and 59,000?
Yeah, but they had to put it there.
Round it off.
Just round it off and put 666 there. The Merck family was a German family of industrialists, bankers, what else, known for establishing the world's oldest pharmaceutical company, as well as the Hamburg Merchant Bank. The family still owns a majority shares in the pharmaceutical company Merck. During the interwar years, George Merck oversaw Merck's involvement in the development of synthetic vitamins, sulfurs, antibiotics, and hormones. George Merck was president of Merck & Co. pharmaceutical firm in the US. During World War II, George led the US War Research Service with Frank Olson, which initiated the US biological weapons program. Frank Olson, PhD, was an American bacteriologist, biological warfare scientist, and an employee of the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, USBWL, who worked at Camp Detrick, now Fort Detrick, in Maryland. The War Research Service was also headquartered at Fort Detrick, so they both worked together. And this now brings us full circle to the Huxley, MK Ultra, Alan Moore, LSD, and the Smiley Face connection. You remember the name, I'm sure, most of you, Frank Olson. Now let's go back to Alan Moore's Watchman character again, Chris, the comedian. Explain what happened to the comedian.
Well, like I said, he basically, at the beginning of the Watchman comic book, gets lobbed out of a window, down, and dies numerous stories, and then that's when the Doomsday Smiley Face Watchman logo comes from, with the splatter blood aimed at 5 to 12. Now, I get the link, because I was telling you this, and then you went, oh my God, that's Frank Olson.
Exactly. It turns out that Frank Olson was covertly dosed with LSD by his colleague, Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb, then head of the CIA's MKUltra program. 9 days later, he plunged to his death from the window of the Hotel Statler in New York on November the 28th, 1953. The Statler Hotel in New York became the Hotel Pennsylvania. The Statler Hotel chain was sold to Hilton Hotels in 1954, the year after. The Rockefeller Commission, a trustworthy commission, reported on the CIA in 1975, acknowledged their having conducted covert drug studies on fellow agents. So not just on the population or the army or unwilling prisoners in prisons, but they actually, hey mate, do you want a drink? Yeah, here's 25 trips.
I remember watching stuff about that. I mean, have you ever seen the film Jacob's Ladder?
I have never watched it, Chris. No.
That goes into that world. And I remember reading about this years and years and years ago. And I think his family are still trying, or they were still trying to sue for saying that they murdered the dad or granddad or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, it's a very similar story, isn't it?
But this is all around the same timeline, isn't it? The 50s, Aldous Huxley was banging to this LSD. I mean, it was before that, but it was... So he was part of all this...
Is that window throw a coincidence? That's what's the point. Is that a coincidence?
Again, when you're doing this research, the same names seem to pop up. The same families seem to pop up, even though there's different characters intermixing with them.
Same weird instances.
The same like weird instances pop
window
up.
Throw,
yeah. I mean, that's Smiley Face. Also, and we'll come on to this in a bit, but that Smiley Face of the comedian with the head splat, then you've got, it was written in, Smiley Face was in 1963, and JFK got shot through head. And that blood splat is right where he got shot.
Yeah.
That's the Watchman
triangle of smiley faces.
Yeah, exactly. Olson's death is one of the most mysterious outcomes of the CIA mind control project, MKUltra. The US government first described his death as a suicide and then as misadventure, while others allege murder.
Is Gottlieb... Sorry, fine. Is Gottlieb that guy who said he had like the best job in the world? Is that him?
Yes.
He was setting up stings with prostitutes and LSD and all that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. There were a few of them. I think that might be Jolie West.
Right.
Which we're going to come on to in a bit. But
all right,
there were quite a lot of them doing that, weren't there? But Gottlieb was the guy who was heading up MKUltra.
Right.
Do you know what? I edited so much out of this part because I didn't want it to be a big part of this. I wanted it to be just to show that these people are all intertwined with this. I mean,
I know that one of them, I saw one of them described it as he had the best job in the world because he could just do what he wanted.
Yeah.
I don't know which one of these.
Well, this guy's got a free ticket. This guy's got a free ticket, basically.
And some of the stuff he described reminded you of that prostitute bit in Godfather where they set him up.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it also reminds you of like Jason Bourne, doesn't it? When he's it's that type of. I mean, one of the guys. We'll come on to him in a sec. Gottlieb conducted experiments with cannabis, or THC, a derivative from cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and mescaline. He realised that CSD had not been properly tested or investigated by the agency. Oh, that's a shame, isn't it? So he might as well do it himself. Gottlieb used physicians such as Scottish-born Donald Ewan Cameron and Harris Isbell in controversial psychiatric research, including non-consciential human experiments. And if you remember, we talked about Donald Cameron in the Trudeau one, because I think he was at Toronto University, and they got sued 20, 30 years later for conducting these experiments. And
I think they even admitted that they went into tube stations and released gases and down alleyways and then followed the people in them alleyways. I think that's admitted, isn't it?
Yeah, it is admitted. Yeah. And we I mean, this is not dissimilar from Operation Cauldron that we were talking about. That came out of Fort Detrick, and Lyme disease as well. All these things come out of this era, where they were spraying and dropping ticks and all across the length and breadth of Britain and Europe and
But your government loves
America.
you, and the government loves you, and they just want you to take that thing.
Trust us. Trust us. It's
Trust us while we get you in a headlock and garrote you.
Yeah, its efficacy is 100%. But it's not. The efficacy is not what we're telling you it is. Gottlieb administered LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs to unwitting subjects and financed psychiatric research and development of techniques that he said would crush the human psyche to the point that he would admit anything.
Nice. Lovely. Thank you, Gottlieb.
These are his own words. An interesting link to Gottlieb, and back then, full circle to the Summer of Love and like the Doors and things like that, is a link to Louis Jolyon West, known as Jolly West, who pioneered research into the use and abuse of LSD. I think he actually drugged up an elephant or something like that at one point.
That sounds familiar. I've heard that story.
Yeah. West received funds from the CIA through the Human Ecology Fund, and West became part of the MK Ultra project. Author Tom O'Brien, in his book Chaos, it's a fantastic book. I'm just reading halfway through it, actually. Big book. It took him 20 odd years to, we mentioned two good books there to buy if you're going to want to look at some books. Anyway, he uncovered links to Gottlieb West and West's involvement in a program with Charles Manson in the late 50s and early 60s, well before the Tate LaBianca killings. He was also appointed as Jack Ruby's psychiatrist.
Jack Ruby Slippers.
Yeah, Jack Ruby Slippers. And so we've now come to, is Jack Ruby psychiatrist? Huxley, JFK died on exactly the same day. He's now going and drugging Jack Ruby. He pronounced Jack Ruby psychotic and delusional after the first 45-minute meeting.
Skilled psychiatrist.
Yeah, he said he suggested further interrogation. So bear in mind, he's his psychiatrist, but he's talking about interrogation, not questioning or helping. Yeah, under the influence of sodium pentanol and hypnosis.
I'm guessing sodium pentanol is a truth serum of sorts, is it?
Yeah, but they also use it. Sodium pentanol or sodium thiopental is on the World Health Organization list of essential medicines. And it's used to induce medical comas and used in the US to execute prisoners by lethal injection.
Fucking hell. Wow.
It's an essential medicine, Chris.
Right. Should be in everyone's cabinet.
Yeah. Jack, this is one of your 5 a day.
With a little skull and crossbones on it.
So Jack Ruby's diagnosis of total mental breakdown happened after the first of West's consultations. According to Tom O'Brien's book, Chaos, West had bragged that he could brainwash a subject within a short period of time and turn them into a Manchurian candidate or totally destroy them mentally.
Bloody hell. Well, it sounds like that guy's ego is just out of control, so he would admit that, wouldn't he? Because he's going around bragging about it.
Yeah, so you've got the guy who employed him at bragging that he can destroy somebody and turn them to jellyfish.
Yeah.
And you've got the guy he's employed saying he could turn them to jellyfish. You've got the other 2 guys that worked at universities that have been sued for brainwashing people.
Well, you imagine these have all been given free reign to do all these experiments, right?
These are the ones we know about.
They're untouchable, so you can imagine their egos. So they're going around shouting the fat mouths off about it, aren't they?
So we've got, at the time of the shooting of a possible Manchurian candidate 1, Lee Harvey Oswald, on November the 24th, 1963, my Manchurian candidate 2, Jack Ruby, who at the time was also taking metadrezine, a central nervous system stimulant.
I have to point out as well, very quickly, and it's not me who found this out, but I always find that fascinating. The Jack Ruby Slippers and the Wizard of Oswald connection.
But That
That's
was
bizarre.
that was Shelby Downard.
Was it? Right.
That was in his book. We're going to talk about that in a minute, actually. He called it The Killing of the King, or King 33.
I've never read that. I've never read that one. Yeah, but Wizard of Oz is often used in the MK Ultra world, isn't it? I suppose.
Yes.
I mean, you can't dispute that link, can you?
Well, I don't think you can. The Killing of Oswald by Jack Ruby Slippers. I mean, come on. I mean, do you know when I heard that on Crow 777?
Is that where it was? I knew it.
It was Crow 777, yeah. Right. When I heard that on there, because I know when Crow found it out, you could tell that he'd gone, oh my, he gets quite excited when he learns something like that.
Slap the top of your head moment.
Yeah. But yeah, so at the time that he killed Lee Harvey Oswald, he was taking fenmetrazine, which is a stimulant for his central nervous system. It'd be interesting to see who's giving him all these drugs.
Well, we know that guy, wasn't it?
He couldn't even. When they interviewed him, he couldn't even remember being in the underground.
Right.
He couldn't remember anywhere. So, yeah. So behind the Flower Power Summer of Love in 1967 and the second Summer of Love in the UK in 1988 to 89, there were powerful sources at play. The Smiley Face, to me, seems a little bit more sinister now, doesn't it, you?
Mm. Yeah.
So why mention this information about the first and second Summer of Love? LSD, MK Ultra, CIA, Tavistock, etc. Well, the Huxleys, Sir Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley, and their younger brother, Sir Andrew Huxley, were the generation of Huxleys in the mix of this academic science religion. And here we have Fort Detrick mentioned, who, along with the UK's Porton Down, were used for projects like Operation Cauldron or Operation LAC, the large area coverage trials that poisoned us and generations before us, and still do in a huge eugenics operation. I mean, what on earth are they doing now?
Well, chemtrails.
Yeah, exactly. Then they employed lunatics like Sidney Gottlieb, who in turn employed Donald Cameron, Harris Isbell, and Jolly West to conduct experiments using LSD and other drugs to mass mind control populations. And then we have Sir Julian Huxley, president of the Eugenics Society, and the person who basically invented transhumanism. And then we talk about two well-known producers of films to changing the sex.
Mm.
Just in this conversation, we're talking about that. Yeah. Who came up with the films V for Vendetta and things like that. Then we have Aldous Huxley, who many say actually ran Tavistock and possibly MK Ultra, and used LSD with Timothy Leary, who wrote dystopian novels that have a habit of coming true. Then we have Sir Andrew Huxley, the president of the Royal Society, who married. This is interesting. We're going to come on to this in further episodes. He married Jocelyn Richenda Gemmell. Her maiden name was Pease, the daughter of geneticist Michael Pease, son of Edward R. Pease, founding member of the Fabian Society, and one of the founding families of Barclays Bank. And his wife, Helen Bowen Wedgwood, eldest daughter of the First Lord Wedgwood, part of the Darwin Wedgwood family, relative of left-wing Viscount Tony Wedgwood Benn.
So Darwin Wedgwood, Darwin making little china cups out of your bones. Nice. Gives it a whole new look, doesn't it, when you see those like old colonial English things where they're drinking tea, drinking tea out of those little
tea with them long wigs on.
Yeah, and and probably the enemy's bones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've used bones as trophies for.
Do you know? I never knew that bone china was made of bones. Actually, you mentioned it. I didn't know that.
Isn't it weird how it's called bone china, and we would never think it were made out of bones?
No, I didn't know that.
I think it's bone powder. Well, it's bone powder, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense because it's so strong. It's quite strong and translucent, isn't it? It's,
yeah. But it's a different cup, isn't it? It's not like a normal pottery. It's like clay. Yeah. It is actually a different.
It's so fine you can see light through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And my Mrs. Dad, he likes drinking tea through proper bone china.
Right.
Old school type.
I mean, have I even ever seen anybody in China? I don't even know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Interestingly, that these guys were bang smack in the founding of the Fabian Society, and a British socialist organisation whose purpose is to advance the principles of social democracy and democratic socialism via gradualist and reformist efforts in democracies, rather than by revolutionary overthrow. That's just a nudge that Mickey uses.
I'm going to say that sounds like the original of all the other foundations and societies you talk about now. Sounds like the blueprint, doesn't it?
Well, listen to this, right? The
Screw
Fabian
you,
Society.
make it sound nice.
Yeah, the Fabian Society's purpose is to promote greater equality of power, wealth, and opportunity, the value of collective action and public service, an accountable, tolerant, and active democracy, citizenship, liberty, and human rights, sustainable development, and multilateral international cooperation.
Oh God, that's even more so, isn't it, than what I just said? It's like, oh God, they were doing it even then. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is like, again, the Fabian Society. That was the World Economic Forum, isn't it?
I'm going to say you could take any of them foundations and whatever you've talked about over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's just a blueprint for that, isn't it?
Yes.
A lot of words that sound lovely, but really they're to fucking bend you over and rod you and bring the cousins.
But bear in mind, I mean, a lot of these, like Keir Starmer, Romper Stomper, he's a member at Fabian Society. B. Lyle was, all these people are all members of this that then go to the World Economic Forum, that are then interviewed by Bill Gates, that are then, go to all the same clubs and whatever meetings.
It's the same word, in fact. It's the same word, and it's the same little sentence, isn't it?
And I think they write these things to know, let the other people know that they're in their club, and they're following the orders. The Fabian Society was founded on the 4th of January 1884 in London as an offshoot of a society founded the year earlier, called the Fellowship of the New Life. It could be New Labour.
Sounds like hobbits.
You just sound like hobbits. Early fellowship members included the visionary Victorian elite, among them poets Edward Carpenter and John Davison, sexologist Havelock Ellis, and the before-mentioned early socialist Edward R. Pease. Edward Carpenter was an English utopian socialist, poet, philosopher, anthologist, an early activist for gay rights and prison reform. Bit of a
good combo.
Good combo there. Whilst advocating vegetarianism and taking the stance against vivisection. As a philosopher, he was particularly known for his publication of Civilization, Its Cause and Cure. Here he describes civilization as a form of disease through which human societies pass. Aldous Huxley recommended Carpenter's pamphlet, Civilization, Its Cause and Cure, in his book, Science, Liberty and Peace. So he's recommending a book where somebody's writing about civilization is a disease.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because most people haven't heard of even the word eugenist.
No. I know.
They don't realise that apparently in the pantomime of the world that Hitler got all his ideas from these clowns, isn't
it? Yeah. And they don't realise the ramifications of what we're seeing here is the undercurrent to what's going on. They were a lot more open about it in 1887 or whatever.
They were trying to get people on side, weren't they? Saying, we need to purify the race kind of thing. By selective breeding and neuting people who aren't worthy kind of thing. And they kind of had people on side as well, didn't they? Because they literally it went out in America, didn't it? They really did,
big style. Big style, yeah.
People don't realise that. Then you slag off the Nazis and Germany. It was happening in America. And we came up with it over here.
Yeah. And these people, like Carpenter there, is the founding father of the Fabian Society. And it's offshoot. Well, Fabian Society is an offshoot of this group that I mentioned earlier. What was it called?
Fellowship of the New Life.
Fellowship of the Hobbits, yeah. Which again sounds like the human potential movement, doesn't it? It is the similar sort of thing. When we come into that later on, we'll see the similarities of how they've sort of changed eugenics through the ages, because as Edward Bernays said, that propaganda got a bad name because of what the Nazis did to it, Goebbels, and same with eugenics, just same people, same, just change the name. It's transhumanism now. It's eugenics. Another chap who,
it's even worse than that fight. It's save the planet world, isn't it? You know, add that onto it, and that's basically now a eugenics movement. But you save the planet.
Exactly, yeah. Another chap who was one of the founders is Henry Havelock Ellis. He was an English physician, eugenicist, always good to be a eugenicist, writer, progressive intellectual, and a eugenicist, social reformer, and a eugenicist, who studied human sexuality.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. He studied it, human sexuality.
So it's amazing, though, isn't it? The word in fact, progressive intellectual.
Yeah.
And then you think now they can just put under someone who's found something out, disgraced journalist.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
progressive intellectual,
anti-Semitist.
Just any words. Just I mean, they don't even need words. Just put an emoji in it now.
Yeah. He co-wrote the first medical textbook in English on homosexuality in 1897. And he also published works on a variety of sexual practices and inclinations, as well as on transgender psychology.
Right, in 1897.
In 1897. This is when it started.
Well, I mean, there has
I think
Carpenter,
that Carpenter, the guy before, I think he was gay.
Right.
Yeah. So there was a part of British society that was quite open about it, especially in this sort of this field, like poetry and that type of work, the arts and stuff like that.
Well, there's always been homosexuality. There's always been transgender.
Of course there has, yeah.
And usually transgenders aren't gay, are they?
No,
they just like to dress as women generally. I mean, I might be a bit ignorant on that subject, but that's generally.
But here we have them working on it. Huxley's in the middle of it. They're working on this type of information. I think this Havelock Ellis, his wife was a gay lady, a lesbian, and so
Well, I suppose in them days you would have done that, wouldn't you? I suppose if you were gay, you'd marry a gay woman so you could continue with your.
I don't think he were gay.
All right, sorry.
It was the guy Carpenter before who was.
Right. But what you would do is maybe you'd know it within your marriage and you'd continue just to save face in the society world that they lived in.
Especially if you were a progressive intellectual and who studied human sexuality.
Yeah, clearly why he's studying human sexuality.
Yeah. He's also credited with introducing the notions of narcissism and autoeroticism, later adopted by psychoanalysis.
Right.
So they're basically inventing what you should, like the Freudian stuff. Yeah. Ellis was also among the pioneering investigators of psychedelic drugs and the author of one of the first written reports to the public about an experience with mescaline, which he conducted on himself in 1896.
Right.
Ellis supported eugenics and served as one of the 16 vice presidents of the Eugenics Society from 1909 to 1912. In Brave New World, Huxley paints a picture of a dystopian world set in a futuristic world state whose citizens are environmentally engineered into an intelligence-based social hierarchy. Sir Julian Huxley was president of the Eugenics Society, and Aldous Huxley used mescaline, and is also pushing what these guys are doing. Are we to believe that all this happened by chance and none of it is linked? I mean, these are, if we're going to say what this was, these are sort of like the notes of bits of conversations that we've had that you've sort of put together.
Yeah.
And you can see how linked they all are. Even if Aldous Huxley didn't know Frank Olson, for argument's sake, he's certainly linked in that web where, if you were drawing Aldous Huxley and MK Ultra and then Frank Olson is linked to it, whether we like it or not, and LSD and all the other stuff as well. Just like those two brothers who wrote V for Vendetta and used the smiley face and now have changed gender.
They didn't write it.
Produced it, sorry, and changed gender and Huxley were part of Tavistock,
Yeah.
who was changing people's gender.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say those two sisters from the Matrix, I mean, that was very early even before anyone was on about the transgender thing, really. That was way before. So they were setting the ball rolling, if you like, quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
Or balls rolling.
Yeah, or balls rolling. Maybe they had the balls rolling. Yeah. But yeah, it's again, as I said at the beginning, we're seeing talking of the Matrix, the zeros and ones of the Matrix. We are witnessing that. We can't quite work out why or who's playing behind the curtains, so to speak. We can't quite see through it yet. You're listening to part 1 called Echoes of the Huxleys. And part 1 is not specifically just about the Huxleys, but we're discussing their ties to events, other family links, esoteric synchronicities that connect some of the Huxleys, mainly Aldous, Julian, Andrew, and grandfather Thomas, in these initial episodes of part 1. We're now winding down episode 1, but for the last 30 minutes, hour or so, we're going to be setting the scene for the next episode, which will be the 60s, because it was quite an important decade for all of us. Even if you weren't born, then it was an important decade. It seems to have set the scene for a lot of things that happened. And on Friday, the 22nd of November, 1963, 3 influential people died. Now, before we go into those 3, I think you've got some sort of interesting things that happened on that day. And I'm sure, I mean, that the numerology behind that is off the scale to start with, right? But there's some interesting things that happened on that day, and I think you're just going to read a few out there.
Well, 1963 is a 19, isn't it? And you got the 11, you got the 20, yeah. Well, I just went and had a look at a few interesting things. There were a few that stuck out. Well, it's the 326th day of the year, which is an 11. But in going back to 1307, Pope Clement V issues the Papal Bull. I won't even try and pronounce it.
Papal Bull.
Papal Bull, sorry. It's too long, which instructed all Christian monarchs in Europe to arrest all the Templars and seize all their assets, which is quite interesting.
I mean, that's a big one in itself, isn't it? I mean, I don't think we can.
Templars.
I don't think we can begin to understand how big that would have been at that particular time.
Yeah. Well, that thing there leads up to what all those nut job conspiracy theorists talk about, really, doesn't it?
Yes, especially when you look at
mentioned.
Yeah. Especially when you look at a lot of these characters that are in the news now, like say Trudeau, are related to that genealogy line.
Yeah. And I mean, is that part of the secret war that's still going on now? I would imagine, possibly.
I would say it's definitely a part of it.
Part of the war that we don't really understand.
Yeah.
The Templar thing.
It's certainly the zeros and ones that we're seeing throughout this first hour alone, but the Matrix, if you like, they're part of that, aren't they? The fabric.
Whether the Templars were the good or bad guy, I mean, they used to be portrayed as the good guys, and then I suppose recent history they started being portrayed as Satanists, haven't they? Baphomet worshipping. Who knows? We don't know, do we?
Let's just say you've got 2 sets of robbers. Is one of them a good guy or a bad guy?
Or even just from their point of view, from everyone's point of view, they're doing the right thing, aren't they?
Yeah, it's how good your PR machine is, isn't it? You will also see on the Wikipedia page on the screen now that Edward II was involved in some way in carrying out the Papal Bull order issued by Pope Clement V on the 22nd of November 1307. Remember, the Papal Bull order was issued by Pope Clement V on 22nd of November, and that Aldous Huxley died the same day, 22nd of November, as did JFK and C.S. Lewis. This was in 1963. Edward II's son, known as Edward of Windsor, or Edward III, is a direct descendant of Sir Julian Huxley and Aldous Huxley. These cannot be mere coincidences. And these types of coincidences will occur throughout the whole series. Also note that the Knights Templar were involved and that the Cross of Malta appears. We are witnessing ancient replaying of history.
Yeah.
Really?
1718, Edward Teach, I think it's pronounced that, a.k.a. Blackbeard. His boat was boarded and he was killed off the coast of Carolina.
Right.
Now, could be relevant because when you think of Blackbeard, what do you think of? You think of Skull and Bones, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, was that the beginning of the Skull and Bones secret society? Who knows? I mean, what is it? The pirateers were working for the crown, weren't they?
Yeah, the privateers and the pirates. Yeah, well, look, they were working for both, weren't they? There were privateers working for the crown, and they could keep all their spoils, if you like. But then at times they were sort of fighting against the crown as well, weren't they? Whether it was the Spanish crown or the English crown, and that was the problem with them, wasn't it? But
But I would hazard a guess as well. We still know Blackbeard's name now from 1718 because somebody somewhere wants us to know his name. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Otherwise, how would we know about him?
So, just as a side note to this pirate information that Chris has just been talking about with Blackbeard, an interesting bit of research we did, adding to this pirate stuff, which links nicely to the Huxley family as well. This research I'm going to go into now was done last summer. Lorraine sent it me on email. And at first we thought, well, it's a bit innocuous, this. Interesting, but innocuous. Until now. Now it makes sense with this stuff that Chris has added to it. So Blackbeard, a.k.a. Edward Teach, was linked to another pirate called Stede Bonnet, known as the Gentleman Pirate. Bonnet, or Bonnet, was a moderately wealthy landowner before turning to a life of crime. Bonnet was born into a wealthy English family on the island of Barbados and inherited the family estate after his father's death in 1694. Now, I think when we say father's estate, I think we can surmise that it's probably a slave plantation of some nature. Yeah. So they're probably at some point in that family history involved in the importation of slaves or buying of slaves. Despite his lack of sailing experience, Bonnet decided he should turn to piracy in the winter of 1716, or it could have been the spring of 1717, because that's what you do. You just decide, being a landowner.
So he's basically a rich kid who's thought, you know what, screw this, I'm going to be a pirate.
Yeah, it's like twacking cars. I'm going to do it. While at Nassau in the Bahamas, Bonnet met pirates Captain Benjamin Hornigold and Edward Teach, Blackbeard, for the very first time. Blackbeard played a large role in the remainder of Bonnet's life. Disabled by his wounds, Bonnet temporarily ceded command of his ship, the Revenge, to Blackbeard, but remained on board as a guest of the more experienced pirate captain. There had also been rumours, if you want, or historical rumours, that they were apparently homosexuals and had a homosexual relationship or bisexual on that ship. And I think there was a TV program on Netflix. I might be wrong there, but anyway, about that. But it could also be a release to this gender LGBT stuff that's going on as well. That says,
is it also that? Is that where that rumor that sailors are homosexuals? Is
quite possibly. I think that's where the name matey comes from, doesn't it?
Right.
As well. But anyway, so here's the Huxley pirate link. Interesting. So Julian and Aldous Huxley's grandfather was Thomas Huxley, and his wife and their grandmother was one Henrietta Ann Heathorn. Now, if you're watching this and not listening to it on a podcast, you'll be seeing the genealogy sheets that I'm putting up. Henrietta Ann Heathorn was born on the 1st of July 1825, possibly in the West Indies, and she was the daughter of Henry Heathorn. Henrietta was the mother of Noel Huxley, Marion Collier Huxley, Leonard Huxley, which was Aldous and Julian's father, Rachel Shawcross Huxley, Henrietta Nettie Roller Huxley, Henry Huxley, Gladys Collier, and her maiden name was Huxley, and Jessie Oriana Huxley. So following the line, Henrietta Ann Huxley, Heathorn's mother, was one Sarah Henrietta Richardson Thomas, daughter of Iry Whittaker Thomas and Oriana Thomas. Now, a lot of these names are the same, and they do get a bit confusing. But so we're following the line of our Oriana Thomas, as you'll be seeing on screen. Oriana Thomas was the daughter of Reverend Thomas Harris. Again, it gets a bit confusing because he's called Thomas now and his surname's Harris. But anyway, and her mother was Oriana Harris. Now we're following that line. Oriana Harris was the daughter of Edward Bonnet and Mary Bonnet. And Edward Bonnet was the son of Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate.
Right, fucking hell.
Making Stede Bonnet a direct descendant of Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley via their grandmother's lineage. They're a direct descendant of gentleman pirate. And he's a close friend, possibly lover, of Blackbeard, who died on the same day, the 22nd of the 11th, as Aldous Huxley did a couple of 100 years, 250 years after.
It's funny that characters like Blackbeard, I'm guessing they were like movie stars in them days. I mean, even I think Johnny Depp even said he played the pirate he played as like a rock star, because that's what they were like.
Yeah. Keith Richards, wasn't it? He copied it off, didn't he?
Yeah. So they were early influencers, weren't they? You could say.
Yeah.
They were like they were the people.
Cool guys. And they made him out in popular sort of culture to be like Robin Hood and people
we all know
like
Blackbeard. We know Black. You've heard of Blackbeard from being a kid. It got implanted in your mind when you were a kid. Yeah. And then it turns out he's from some rich. They're from these rich families. They're not quite as. As a guess, you'd guess them to be like working class, rebelling against the state kind of thing.
Yeah. But I mean, how would they afford a ship? How would they get crew? Yeah. They've got to get crew somewhere.
They were working for Crown, weren't they? To rob and pilger and. Yeah. So they didn't have the Crown name on it. They could rob the French or whoever and pretend it was nothing to do with them, kind of thing.
Yeah. And if you think about what the Huxleys do, the Huxleys and families like that and people of that ilk, the Johnsons and that, they're working for the Crown as well, or the parasite class.
And if you think of like I mentioned earlier, the fact that they've got the Skull and Bone flag that they're famous for, which goes back to the Skull and Bones, Yale University. I'm sure most people know about that, i.e., the Bushes were in it, John Kerry, and loads of influential people. I looked at an early Skull and Bonesmen as they call them. They were like railroad builders.
Yeah,
they were like railroad builders and stuff. And it's Order 322 or Brotherhood of Death. I mean,
nice.
And it started in 1832. So
not live, death.
Not live. Not yeah. You could almost say that those pirates went on land, pulled up in America, and then started up their own little order in Yale University, couldn't you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the Bush family follows the same lineage. We're going to come to this in further episodes when we get into the Huxleys. We're not even touching on the Huxleys yet, but the Bushes share the same lineage back through to Edward III descents as Aldous Huxley, and that's via his mother Julia Arnold. And I keep saying I'm sure that the Arnold family is in Fritz Springmeier's book as a sub family. They're not the headline 12, 13 Illuminati, but they are a sub family within that, because they're a very prominent political family in America and a very prominent academic family in Britain, which we'll come on to. It's a very interesting story. But Blackbeard said his father was killed by a kraken. Not a crackhead, a kraken.
Who knows if them krakens existed? They were just giant squids, weren't they? Maggie Thatcher steps down in 1990.
What a downer. Margaret Thatcher now. And would you believe it, that Margaret Thatcher, who lost power, as Chris mentioned, on the 22nd of the 11th, 1990, also has Huxley links. Right. And again, it's all in the bloodline. Thatcher was the niece, an illegitimate niece, of Diana, Viscountess of Norwich, also known Lady Diana Cooper, another Lady Diana, an English actress, got to be an actress, an aristocrat, who was a well-known social figure in London and Paris. Right. You used to be a well-known social figure in London and Paris, didn't you, Chris?
London, not Paris.
Huddersfield and Halifax, you were a well-known social figure. This is what Lady Diana Cooper told the royal biographer Michael Thornton in an interview back in 1979. That she, Lady Diana Cooper, she was the product of an affair between her mother Violet, Duchess of Rutland, and a devastatingly handsome English aristocrat, Henry Cockayne Cust, the number one lady killer of his generation. Lady Cooper also said that another young woman succumbed to Cust's charms, and she was a certain Mrs. Phoebe Stevenson, who briefly worked as a housemaid at the 17th century Brownlow stately home, Belton House, near Grantham. She said the child of that relationship, Beatrice Stevenson, was Margaret Thatcher's mother. So Beatrice and I, biologically speaking, are half-sisters, and Maggie, therefore, is actually my niece, said Lady Diana Cooper back in 1979.
I thought Margaret Thatcher came from a working-class background.
She does. Her mum and dad owned a corner shop, Chris.
Yeah, bollocks.
This is. Do you know? We talk about zeros and ones, and somewhere someone has plucked that woman, and she probably did have a normal upbringing. To be fair to her, but somebody knows about her bloodline.
Yeah. I think again, bringing up Fritz Springmeier, I think it was him that said that, wasn't it? That
yes.
They take these bastards. I mean, like you've seen. I think we've said this before, but you see in those old films of royalty, you know, say Game of Thrones-esque, where the king knows he's got a little bastard son, and he knows he's going to look after him, but the son doesn't even necessarily know that that's his dad.
Well, in the Game of Thrones, they have names from like one of the main characters were called Jon Snow,
right?
So they actually called them. The bastards were called Snow. They actually had surnames for the bastards. Yeah,
I'm saying Game of Thrones. I've not watched it. But
well, I've only read the books. I've never watched it.
You know that world, that when you think of that hierarchy world in these things where it's kings and queens and it's almost a reflection of now, isn't it? Where you've got the top boy class running the show, and we're just ready to fight for them or whatever, and all that politics and all that infighting and stuff. And
what I find interesting, Chris, is that how much detail is gone into to follow these people around, because obviously not all of them turn into psychopathic lunatics like Thatcher, for argument's sake. So out of 100 of these illegitimate lineages, most of them will fall by the wayside and won't want to take part. But every now and again they'll get the hook in one that takes it to that next level. And these illegitimate lot, like Johnson and all these other people, seem willing to take it to be that psycho, don't they?
Well, maybe because of the bloodline, or maybe this is what they believe, that they're more susceptible to it, or more susceptible to their mind programming, or I mean, that's one thing I've heard or read. I can't remember where, but
one thing that comes out through this research, this type of research, and other people's research that we've read books on and watched, is that brainwashing or mind control, MK Ultra, Manchurian candidates, all this type of thing runs thick through all this research that we're talking about now, doesn't it?
Well, I would say that there is a genetic trauma, isn't there? I think, or a genetic happiness, even. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So so that it's a similar thing. They could maybe more susceptible to nastiness and evil, or doing what they're told, or who knows.
Yeah.
Because I've often thought, like, working in kitchens all these years, you take the Spanish, the English, the French, the Italians, right? We have an air of like we're owed something, or
superiority.
Superiority, that's the word I'm looking for. We have an air of superiority. Not always bad or good, but it's definitely there.
It is there. Yeah, arrogance. You could call it
an arrogance. Yeah, it's an arrogance. Yeah,
a bit of arrogance. Yeah.
I'm not saying we all do it nastily, but it is there.
Yeah, it is. Bigoted at times as well. Whether we like it, whether we like to admit it or not. But I'll show the lineage of this Henry Cockayne Cust, right name, that, isn't it? Cockayne Cust, C-U-S-T. It's a double barrel name, Cockayne Cust. Henry John Cockayne Cust was an English politician and editor who served as an MP. He was the son of Henry Cockayne Cust Sr., the younger grandson of Brownlow Cust, first Baron Brownlow of Belton House near Grantham, Lincolnshire, where I mentioned before. So this means that the Iron Lady had centuries of royal aristocratic blood coursing through her veins. The Brownlows can trace their lineage back to Gauthier d'Ancourt, who was of royal blood and who fought alongside William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings. From my brief look into the French d'Ancourts, the family is also linked to the Carolonian dynasty via Matilda of France. The Carolonian dynasty was a Frankish noble family named after Charlemagne, the first emperor of the Romans. the Merovingian dynasty was also connected, or possibly connected. The Merovingians were the ruling family of the Franks from the Middle Ages, from the middle 5th century until about 751. And as we know, the Merovingian parasite Illuminati bloodline is linked to all that is bad in the world. And it's very interesting that they say that the Roman Empire started roughly around 800. Roughly, I think. I might have got that wrong, but roughly. And there seems to have been some kind of shift. Like the Incas, I think, disappeared just before the 800. Then the Roman Empire, it's like there's some sort of reset every now and again, isn't it?
We don't have a clue, do we, really?
No, we don't have a clue, but it seems that way. If Thatcher has this parasitical Merovingian bloodline, you've got Belia, Schwab, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Oppenheimers. I could go on, Warburgs. All these people have this lineage. That even Trudeau. Remember we did Trudeau? He had that lineage as well. So what's the Huxley-Thatcher link? Well, their bloodline goes all the way back to King Edward III. This is the same lineage that Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley share via their mother, Julia Arnold, who I mentioned earlier. So Thatcher is a direct, illegitimate relation to Edward III.
Right. She couldn't look any more Sith-like if she tried, Margaret Thatcher.
No. And it's you look back at these people now, like Blair, Thatcher. Probably not. I say they're the long termers like Blair and Thatcher. Then you've got the people like Theresa May, John Major, who are sort of like the, just
fill us in, just
fill us in.
Brought in to do something, and then sod off. Basically.
Yeah, like Churchill were brought in to do something. Yeah,
well,
and then
you could even say how many prime ministers could you name, and it's those fat cats that you name. You don't. There's a load of stragglers in the middle, but you don't really remember them, do you? Even like Gordon Brown and stuff, they just come in and go, don't they?
Just as another side note on top of this other side note, the title Merovingian, also known as the Frenchman, is used as a fictional name for the fictional character in the Matrix films.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, he's in the restaurant, isn't
he? Yeah. So again, this is inserted into us. I mean, the Matrix films, obviously, people bring that up a lot for this type of. We're mentioning zeros and ones and stuff like that.
And he's got the twin bodyguards, hasn't
he? Yeah. Then you've got the Agent Smiths, and you've got all these types of things that we're seeing now in his lives. It's also written about in the 13 Illuminati bloodlines in Fritz Springmeier's book who were mentioned, and they're interesting books. I'm not saying they're all 100% true. I'm sure stuff's moved on and there's more research being done, but it's interesting. And I'll mention in a future one of these Huxley presentations, I'll mention where I'm getting all this genetic research from, because it's quite interesting that the people that were doing all this genetic research are not doing it because they're of our mindset. They're doing it because they're scholars and are interested in what this bloodline is. Pure, I won't say naive, but they're doing it for that's that bloodline back there. Interested in bloodlines.
Yeah. You do get people interested in genealogy, and when they're interested, they're really interested in it, aren't they?
Yes, and also these guys are professors. They're not interested in what we're talking about. What I've done is, well, if Aldous Huxley's got that, and they've got that, and you can see the connection to these people then. But anyway.
Yeah. Toy Story film comes out. Sounds irrelevant, but I thought I'd mention it because it's the first CGI film ever. And
it's
that was in 1995.
First CGI film, and it'd be interesting now, that date, to actually watch it again, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would, yeah. Because, I mean, you can't deny that that's an important moment in movie history, that first CGI feature film comes out.
Well, it was big news, Toy Story, weren't it? I know our two oldest were that age that went to watch the first Toy Story film, and it was quite a big step forward in animation.
Yeah, and filmmaking in general, yeah.
In fact, I'd say that was the catalyst to all these, like Shrek and things like that, weren't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the beginning of it, that was. And then you flash forward to now, and they just brought out that Lightyear film where you've got two women having a baby.
And who's playing main part in that? Our friend Tom Hanks.
Right, yeah.
This can't be coincidences. You've brought up people passing away, losing power, whatever, on the same days as Aldous Huxley died, right? And JFK died, and C.S. Lewis, yeah?
And they're related to.
And they're related, yeah. And yeah. So now we've got another Toy Story and Disney, right? You just mentioned Toy Story being an important film in history, right? It was made by Disney, right? Toy Story was made by Disney.
I don't think it was then. I think it got bought out by them, didn't it?
Yes.
It was,
but you know that we're investing in these companies.
Exactly,
it's the same parasite behind the scenes, whether we like it or not.
I think what they did, they made out Pixar were like a in the garage animation studio. And then Disney bought them. But like you said, they were probably financed and then got them, but whatever. But yeah, they are Disney now, aren't they? So.
Yeah, they are Disney now. And Walt Disney's lineage goes back to Edward I, who was Edward III's grandfather. The same lineage that Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley share via their mother Julia.
Unless he's actually Adolf Hitler. Which is just, do you know, it sounds like a crackpot theory, that, but...
would you be surprised if you went back through Walt Disney's lineage via Edward I or whatever, back. Then you went back through Hitler's lineage, and somewhere in that lineage there was a bloodline connection.
I mean, I don't want to be rude.
As we see now. Yeah.
But, yeah.
Disney's also listed in Fritz Springmeier's book, so Fritz Springmeier was doing something right going back. But the film Toy Story starred Tom Hanks, our friend Tom.
Yeah.
As the toy cowboy Woody. Interesting name. Hanks, considering what we talk about Tom Hanks and Shaving Ryan's Privates and Tom Hanks, he's got a Woody on. Hanks is a descendant of Richard Vaughan, 1550 to 1607, Bishop of London, a descendant of aristocrats like the Earls of Arundel, and Arundel, I'm sure Arundel was part of that Frozen video. Wasn't there from Arundel in that?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I watched that a million times with my daughter, but anyway. So he's a descendant of the Earls of Arundel and Buchan. He's a descendant of Llewellyn the Great, also known as Llewellyn the First, who was King of Gwynedd in North Wales and eventually Prince of the Welsh in 1228 and Prince of Wales in 1240. He's also a descendant of Sahar de Quincy, the Earl of Winchester. Tom Hanks descends from William the Lion, sometimes styled as William I, who reigned as King of the Scots, and a descendant of Louis IV, the Fat King of France. And he's also a descendant of William the Conqueror and Charlemagne. And he also descends from King John of England, who is a descendant himself of Henry II. Remember, Hanks was also the poster boy for many of the virtue signalling films that have run propagandized agendas. And he also did the smiley face in Forrest Gump. And it's the second time he's appeared in this episode, I think, alone.
Yeah,
Tom Hanks.
Every one of his films is a propaganda film of some form, I would say.
Yeah.
Would you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe even that Somali Pirates one.
But then they were selling that Somali pirate thing everywhere. So what reason was that for? I don't know. Was it just fear, or is it tied into, I don't know, the boat path to Antarctica? Who knows? I don't know, I'm making it up.
Yeah.
But a side note of Toy Story is as well, it's got lots of Shining references in it. I mean, I'm not saying that's got anything to do with anything conspiratorial, but I think it...
it's not got no to do with any of that, Chris.
Well, you've got Shining, then you're linking to Kubrick, moon landings, everything. Yeah. But there's loads of imagery used in the Shining, Toy Story, taken from the Shining. Most obvious one is the carpet in the first one. Right. I mean, it said that the guy who animated it was a fan and it's hidden. I mean, which you would do, to be fair. So it might be nothing nefarious. Because if I was making a cartoon, I'd hide some stuff in there, wouldn't you?
You put some stuff in there, but again, we're not working for Disney or any of these other companies.
And I'd probably choose something other than a really horrible horror film for a kid's film.
There you go. So, I mean, these are three. We come to like three of the things that Chris has mentioned, and all three of them have some sort of link either to royalty or back to the Huxleys, to British royal family, all the way through all of this. And I mean, so Walt Disney is a similar lineage to Aldous Huxley. Tom Hanks is King John of England, Henry II. And we wonder why these people are in this. It's too much of a coincidence to be
well, I mean,
a coincidence.
Look at Disney. Disney didn't become what it is today from frigging Walt Disney drawing Steamboat Willie, did it?
No.
Steamboat Mickey, sorry.
No.
That's another, the garage to the Disney. That's how it started out, was he did that little doodle and it became what Disney is today. And he didn't, did it?
Yeah, he can't do it. It's impossible.
2004, Orange Revolution begins in the Ukraine.
Right. Nothing changes.
Beginning of whether this date means anything in the scheme of things, I don't know. Who knows? 2004 as well, Merkel becomes the first female Chancellor of Germany.
She had a change as well.
That was an interesting one, actually. I wasn't going to mention that, but the UN Security Council Resolution 242 is adopted, establishing a set of principles aimed at guiding negotiations for an Arab-Israeli peace settlement, i.e. Palestine, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And then 2012, same day, ceasefire begins between the Hamas and the Israelis after 8 days of violence, 150 deaths.
Right.
That's a strange one, really, because it's two significant things about the same place on exactly the same day.
Yeah.
And when you tie that into the Templars, maybe it is a date that means something.
Yes, I'm sure it is.
Those 3 people were murdered.
But also, we look at the dates, don't we? And we're looking at the measurement. But they might measure it in a totally different way to how we look at it as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then just one last interesting one, which I thought, well, two actually quickly. 2002, 100 people killed in an attack in Nigeria aimed at Miss World contestants.
Right.
I thought that was a bit weird.
Is that one you went in for?
You would hazard a guess, right? And I'm only guessing that's some kind of false psyop, wouldn't you? Knowing what we know nowadays.
Yeah.
Yes. And the last one, most recent, a shooting in Virginia leaves seven people dead, and a school shooting, and 4 injured. 11.
What year were that in, Chris?
2022.
Right.
I mean, there's that many of them these days. I don't even know which one that is, do you?
No. I don't. But yeah, they're happening a lot, aren't they? So, the last person we're going to mention on this trip, I suppose, is someone who has sort of come to us as we've been doing this, and that's Michael Hutchence. I mean, I didn't like In Excess, I've got to say. I didn't think that type of music wasn't on my radar at all. A bit like the Doors, really.
I could appreciate it, though.
I could appreciate it.
I feel the songs were pretty catchy, weren't they? In the 80s.
Yeah, they were.
Massively into it.
But Hutchence also died on the 22nd of the 11th, and in 1997. And apparently the whole world was left shocked after Hutchence was found hanged in his hotel room in Sydney, aged 37. Now, it'd be interesting to get somebody on who knows more about these esoteric places. You know, the ley lines and all this type of stuff. That'd be an interesting chat, wouldn't it? A bit similar to the chats we have with Jerry and Mark. But apparently, I didn't know this, but I mean, we've mentioned Oliver Stone earlier in this. I think we mentioned him earlier. That he considered, we did because we meant talking about the Doors. He considered Hutchence for the role in the Doors movie,
right? Which went to Val Kilmer, yeah.
Which went to Val Kilmer. Apparently, because Val Kilmer came in and knocked on Stone's door and gave a fantastic account of the script, and he just got the job there and then.
That's how it happens.
Yeah.
We all do millions of pounds invested in it. That's how it happens.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I always thought when I saw Michael Hutchence that he looked like Jim Morrison.
Yeah. He behaved like him, didn't he? Same bangles and open shirt kind of affair going on.
Yeah. Long hair, curly hair.
Yeah.
Especially in Morrison's clean look days when he looked.
Yeah, before he. Yeah.
Before he looked like a smackhead.
There's not a massive load of photos of Jim Morrison, is there? Or is there?
No.
You see the same
is a
one.
Few, but
you see virtually the same few, though, don't it? It's one of them things.
Yeah. Well, when we're going to, it's going to be episode 3. It's like a bonus episode, but that's going to be interesting. I know it's going to be interesting for Chris even. It was interesting for me. I'm not interested at all in the Doors.
No.
At all. But these are the strange links that we've been finding throughout this research. He looked like Jim Morrison, a member of the Doors. He hung himself with his belt on his door.
From a door, yeah.
From a door. And the Doors were named after Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. And I aren't saying that is the reason why it happened, but what I'm trying to say, it's just a weird...
Another bizarro coincidence.
On top of all these other bizarro coincidences.
And then you've got the whole thing around the Geldof.
Yeah, as I like to call him, Gandalf.
Yeah. Well, you've got that strange story of his daughter committing suicide.
Yeah, he looks like a grand wizard.
Yeah, and I mean, he's famous for being in. If you read about him, he's famous for being in the Bootown Rats that were big in the 70s and 80s. They weren't that big in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. They did 2 songs.
Yes.
That got famous. It's a Rat Trap, I think, was one.
Yeah, Rat Trap. Yeah, interesting name.
It's a rat trap, and you've been caught. I think was the
been caught.
Chorus.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And then another interesting one was I Don't Like Mondays, which was about a girl going to school, and it was basically about a high school shooting before high school shootings were even a thing, really.
Yeah, especially in this country. Yeah,
well, they weren't in this country. He's from Ireland. Why was he writing about high school? And he said he had a high school shooting on radio, and that's why he did it. But then
odd subject to write about.
And now he's super famous for Live Aid, wherever.
But if you think about that song, Chris, that song, I bet again if somebody dissembles that song, it's sort of like the wrong words as in the meaning of the words for the type of song it was.
I Don't Like Mondays.
Yeah, I never liked the song because it always scared me. So, and that's what it's portraying, isn't it? Because we were kids at the time. You're talking late 70s here.
Yeah.
And that was a terrifying song.
The thing is, I remember, and I was really young, but I remember the reason why that, and it stuck in my head. I think someone told me, someone said, "Oh, it's because he heard on radio a girl went into school and said, I don't like Mondays," pulled the gun out, started shooting everyone.
Wow.
I mean, what a weird thing to plan. I mean, that's on top of Pops and stuff for kids to listen to. So, I mean, and you call him Grand Wizard, right? And his missus runs off with Michael Hutchinson. And then he gets hung from a door.
Garroted, yeah.
And then, I mean, it's strange. I mean, and then his daughter became a Scientologist, apparently, and then stopped being a Scientologist, and then joined Thelema, aka the Ordo Templari Orientis, O2O, Temple of the East, Aleister Crowley world. And then a year after she announced she was in that, she had an O2O tattoo on her. I think she tweeted an O2O tattoo of herself.
Yeah, I'll put a picture up. It's on her arm, I think. Yeah.
And then she died a year later, literally almost exactly a year later.
But again, we're talking about Crowley again. He's popped up again in this episode.
And also,
just one sec. C.S. Lewis went to Grisham College, where Crowley went. So did other people like Chris Whitty. He went there. And C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis was a dark occultist, and he was writing children's books. And we're going to come on to him in episode 4 of this. And so you've got a dark occultist link to this Gandalf. It's a Bob Gandalf with Hutchins, who looks like some sort of sacrificial ritual style killing, of Jim Morrison again.
Yeah. And also, did you know Geldof were part of the Lucius Trust?
Right.
Which again goes back to Crowley, doesn't it? I believe.
Yeah.
And also, I read this actually when we were just, he became an advisor to the One campaign, which is funded by Bono.
He's good friends with Bono.
One campaign was founded by a coalition of 11 non-profit organisations, including Data, World Vision, Oxfam America, and Bread for the World, all funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Bitch tits, yeah.
So Geldof's linked to them. Notice.
Well, again, does it surprise us, this, Chris? He's saving the world. He's going to be linked to these people, these philanthropists.
Bread for the World, that was a good
Didn't Bono... and again, Bono's somebody I'd like to look at, but didn't Bono raid his charity's piggy bank by about several million?
Did I don't know.
He got accused of putting expense claim in, Chris.
Right. Well, there's a reason a man walks around with dark glasses like that. It's because no one sees. No one sees
with mirrors on the inside.
Mirrors on the inside.
So we're going to talk about one of the band members of the Doors in episode 3, and he's called Ray Manzarek Jr., who was a keyboard player. And he said in a video, which I'm going to play in a minute, of Michael Hutchence, that he reminded him of Jim Morrison in an interview. And he also talks, and it's only a short video, this, he also talks of the serpent power, him having the serpent power.
What the hell does that mean?
I don't know.
Well, Jim Morrison was the Lizard King, wasn't it? That's what he's called.
Jim Morrison was a lizard king, and as we'll find out why he was really called the Lizard King in episode 3, when I go through his genealogy. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to play this video.
Former Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek.
First time I saw him was on MTV. I was just completely blown away. Michael reminded me of Jim Morrison. The Australian invasion had happened. They had the reptile, they had the serpent, they had the serpent power.
Right. What were your thoughts on serpent power and Ray Manzarek Jr. saying?
Just very peculiar. I mean, because you must have just found that video after we discussed the fact.
Yes.
I thought I'd heard somewhere that Hutchinson based his look on Morrison. I weren't sure if I'd heard it or made it up myself, to be fair. But you thought the same thing, and then you find that.
Yeah. And there were quite a few stories out there saying that Jim Morrison looked like Hutchence, or Hutchence looked like Jim Morrison, sorry. But yeah.
I mean, that all hanging from a door thing, I mean, who have you heard? I mean, there's now, I'm just off the top of my head, Hutchinson, Robin Williams, and what's that blooming cook chef called?
I forgot what he was called, but I know what you mean, yeah.
Kitchen Confidential guy.
Yeah. I can't remember his name.
Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
They all hung themselves from a door. I don't know anyone who's hung themselves from a door. Doing some weird sexual act as well, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
I mean, is that part of the sacrificial link?
Ritual?
Yeah, is it a ritual thing?
I don't know. Again, are these people driven to that and they don't know? Yeah, through Voice to Skull, whatever it is. Yeah. Drugs opens that portal, as we're finding out with the MK Ultra stuff.
One thing you do find with these people who just tend to hang themselves from a door, they just vanish. I'm not saying they just vanish, but you don't hear about. No one mentions Robin Williams. No one mentions Michael Hutchinson very often. And he were on the road to be, full-on legendary rock star.
Yeah.
Died young, and no one mentions him. He's not. He didn't get any accolades or anything.
Well, I mean, when you've upset Sir Bob Geldof,
evil wizard,
Grand Wizard, you've nicked his wife, or he's handed his wife to you, and you think you've won the prize. Who knows what goes on, Chris?
Yeah. No, he took their kid back, didn't
he? Yeah. He adopted their child. Yeah, and which all looks like.
So she commits suicide. He hangs himself. It's. That doesn't happen in normal families like that, does it?
I remember being a kid and looking at Bob Geldof and thinking there's something not quite right about him.
Yeah.
And in Live Aid, there's something not quite right. It's trying too hard.
They raised loads and loads of money for Ethiopia, apparently. I know someone who went to Ethiopia, and they made an actual effort to ask people if they'd heard of Live, and they didn't know anything about. No one knew anything about it.
No.
I mean, who do you know goes to Ethiopia?
No, nobody.
You mean, according to what we did or thought we did, that should be over there. We should be, there should be a statue of Bob Geldof somewhere, shouldn't there?
Yeah.
And I always found that song arrogant as well. Do they know it's Christmas time at all?
Yeah.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Do you know what I mean? As if they think of Christmas in Ethiopia.
I know.
Just nonsense, more nonsense. But yeah, just all interesting connections to this date, the 22nd of the 11th. And the links back then to the occult, dark occult, and Huxley, who wrote about the occult, C.S. Lewis, who was dark occultist, all these, and also the JFK thing, which we'll talk about next, which seems to be like a ritual slaying. So on November the 22nd, 1963, the three influential people that died were John F. Kennedy, C.S. Lewis, and Aldous Huxley. One of these deaths would be the catalyst to putting us all on the path to change the course of the future by setting in motion the New World Order plan to completely annihilate the family unit and alter human civilization as it was known forever. At 12:30 on Friday the 22nd of November 1963, JFK was assassinated, if you believe the narrative. It doesn't matter either way, really. That date was chosen, as we've just been speaking about, for a particular reason. Looking back at that event now, it's quite clear, well, it is to me, in my opinion, I don't know about Chris, I'll ask him in a sec, that it seems to have been a sacrificial ritual killing. According to many researchers, according to researchers in names, the given name Kennedy is an anglicised form of Sine Die, a masculine name in the Irish language. The Irish name is composed of two elements, Sinan, and meaning head, and the second, Edai, meaning ugly, or headshot, or ugly head. It's strange how both Kennedys were both shot in the head at some point.
Is that to make sure?
Well, probably, yeah.
Well, and like I say, it's an ugly head, isn't it? We've created an ugly head.
Yeah, is it another some sort of smiley face type thing? You know, the Watchman had a blood splat right in the same place that JFK got shot, on the right-hand side of his head. Well, according to that Zapruder film, anyway, I'm not saying that were real. And so the Watchman covers that, and the Nirvana logo has that dent in its head of the smiley face, that depressing smiley face in the same place.
Well, that looks like a dead smiley face with a cross on it and the tongue out.
Yeah,
and he's got a dent inside of his head as well.
And right in the middle of Dealey Plaza, there's an obelisk, and it's located in the grounds of Dealey Plaza, the site where JFK was shot. So there's something about that area there. They don't plant them in areas for no reason whatsoever, do they?
Well, I think we've discussed in other things, Fatty, that the obelisk is often put in towns to commemorate the dead from World War I and II.
Yeah.
So, and I've always suspected that obelisk means we did this.
Yeah.
Almost a celebration. No disrespect. But
we did this and you don't understand what we did.
Yeah. Possibly. I think there's one where Princess Di died as well.
Right.
If I'm right.
I know, sure. Yeah, where she's buried, I think there is, isn't there?
Yeah.
In King Kill 33, a booklet / essay written by James Shelby Downard, who we mentioned earlier in the first hour, and Michael A. Hoffman II, James Shelby Downard examined and perceived occult symbolism, twilight language, and synchronicity behind historical events like the JFK assassination in the 20th century. Shelby Downard is known for his knowledge of the Masonic conspiracy and that the Freemasons were responsible for the assassination of JFK through a ritual known as the killing of the king. One book I have of Downard's that we mentioned earlier, and I'm going to mention it again, is a self-biographical account of his early life in the clutches of the Masonic satanic power base, where he was a prisoner, apparently. They kept coming back for him, didn't they, Chris? The book is called Carnivals of Life and Death, My Profane Youth, 1913 to 1935, and written in 2006. And Michael Hoffman is an American author, and he's been described by critics as a conspiracy theorist. Two books I have of Michael A. Hoffman's, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, which were written in 1992, and Twilight Language, which we're going to talk about, not the book, but we're going to talk about Twilight Language further on. That was written 2 years ago in 2021. And also involved, as I mentioned earlier, is Alana Freeland, who was involved in some of the writings of James Shelby Downard, editing or ghostwriting and filling in gaps after he passed away. So Twilight Language, that's an interesting thing, and I haven't done a lot of research into it, but it's very interesting. That book of Michael Hoffman's is good. That explains it. And it's a supposed polysemic language and communication system associated with tantric traditions and Vajrayana, Buddhism and Hinduism. Now, the reason I'm talking about this will become clear further on in this last half an hour to an hour. It includes visual communication, verbal communication, and non-verbal communications. Tantric texts are often written in a form of the Twilight language that is incomprehensible to the uninitiated reader. We've just been saying that, Chris. to put an obelisk up. We think it's a celebration of people that passed away. It is, but not for the reasons we think it is.
So could Twilight language drift into art and sculpture and effigies, etc.?
Well, I mean, you've just answered that question by asking that question, haven't you? Really? I think we're going to definitely come onto that in a second. I mean, legalese. I mean, a lot of the people in the Freeman world and stuff like that, they've talked about this double entendre, the double meanings of these words, or even more than double meanings of these words. Like if you say invalid or invalid, it's the same word. It just means two things, but there could be a third meaning to it. Yeah, that we don't understand, and this is part of the Twilight language. It's a very easy, explainable part of it, but
on a very simple basis that I think most people listening to this will understand is the 9/11 thing, the numerological 9/11. I'm not saying we all understand exactly what it's about. I think it's something to do with missing out the 10, which is the God number or something. Yeah. I've heard different explanations for it, but what I mean is when it pops up, and you do see it pop up over and over again, whether it's upside down as 116 or whether it's whatever it is, you see it in all this stuff. And is it signaling to people in that Twilight language that this is something of their doing?
We've just mentioned
look at.
3 people died basically on a 9/11, didn't they? 1963, 21st to the 11th, 3 people. JFK apparently was shot in a triangular effect. People have gone on about all these things that to us it's just a triangle shooting and all. It doesn't mean anything to us, but to them it means a bit more to us now. But
them things are just coming relevant to us over last.
Exactly. Yeah. Isn't it interesting though that, and we'll come on to this Twilight language stuff, and it'll be like the undercurrent to all this, that a lot of influential counterculture, 60s generation, invented by Tavistock and all the other projects and operations that were going, ended up in India studying Buddhism and Hinduism whilst taking LSD, tripping out the minds, then bringing it back via the Twilight language into songs, poems, books, films, and TV programming for the MK Ultra 60s generation. Downard and Hoffman write that the Kennedy assassination was Masonic sorcery.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That sort of sums it up, doesn't it? Yeah. You see where I'm getting with that, Chris, now?
Yeah, as in 9/11 was also probably a Masonic sorcery.
Sorcery, yeah. Interesting that C.S. Lewis was a practicing dark occultist. Also in 1952, 53, a bit unclear when it was, but I think it's 52, Aldous Huxley wrote The Devils of Loudun, Loudun, which was set in France. It's a place in France, but it does sound like London. And around the same time, the year after, I think it was 1954, Huxley published his book, The Doors of Perception, an autobiographical account of his LSD usage, which we'll come on to again in a bit. And this was published by a company called Chatto and Windus, which was the UK, and Harper and Row in the US. Doors of Perception elaborates on his psychedelic experience under the influence of mescaline in May 1953. Chatto and Windus are part of Penguin Random House now, owned by Bertelsmann, who published the propaganda for the Nazi Party. The Devils of Loudun, considered by many to be Aldous Huxley's non-fiction masterpiece, is based on a true story about a Roman Catholic priest, Urbain Grandier, who was convicted of being in league with Satan. He was burned at the stake for witchcraft, for interfering or having sexual encounters with the nuns. And he was burnt at the stake by Armand Jean Duplessis, also known as the Duke of Richelieu, aka Cardinal Richelieu. It became known as the Loudun possessions. I mean, that could be an MK Ultra operation right there.
You said it was the year after he released.
No, it was actually before, but he would have been doing mescaline prior to him writing about it. The Devils is a 1971 British historical drama written and produced and directed by Ken Russell, starring Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave. It is part adapted from the 1952 book by Aldous Huxley and John Whiting's play written in 1960, also based on Aldous Huxley's work from his book. Russell later said at the time he made the film, "I was a devout Catholic and very secure in my faith. I knew I wasn't making a pornographic film, although I'm not a political creature, I always view the Devils," it's interesting how they call it the Devils, "as as my one political film. To me, it was about brainwashing, about the state taking over." So he's doing a film that was about devil worshipping, that in his eyes, he made it about mind control, brainwashing, and the state controlling what you do.
I've never seen that film. I'm aware of it. I think it was on some banned, when they were showing films that used to be banned kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm aware of it. I know it's quite graphic and gory.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to watch it now, wouldn't it?
It would be. The film's graphical portrayal of violence, sexuality, and religion ignited harsh reactions from censors and originally received an X rating in the UK and the US. The Devils was one of the most popular films in 1972 at the box office. The Devils had been cited as one of the most controversial films of all time. Despite the film's controversial status, and none wearing the same habits seen in the film cameos, or can still be seen in film cameos, among characters from numerous Warner Brothers films like Space Jam and New Legacy in 2021.
What do you mean by the same habit fight? What's significant about it?
I think there was like white habits. For some reason, they were wearing a different habit.
Right.
And Warner Brothers keep popping up. We mentioned them, I think, earlier. And they keep... and this book by Huxley has been made into all sorts of things. There was the Devils of Loudun opera, produced by Christoph Penderecki in 1968. So all around the similar sort of time, the 60s. Also based on Huxley and Whiting's play. Interesting, John Whiting also died in 1963. The Devils was his last play.
It's also interesting that they immediately come out and say it's one of it's the most popular film in 1972, but they're also saying it's the most controversial, it's been banned, so they're drumming up the attention for it. So people are going to want to watch it anyway, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I read somewhere that it was number 49 in the most grotesque, violent, or whatever films ever made.
Right. I mean,
yeah.
I'm guessing it's probably pretty tame now.
Maybe, but I mean, some of these old films are actually more scary than some of the new stuff, aren't they?
Well, they can be a bit more blatant, can't they? Like the Devils and,
Yeah.
They just pop cultured it all now and made it more mainstream, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. Yeah. Shelby Downard and Michael Hoffman say that the JFK event was asserted into our minds, and it was the single most largest trauma-based mind control event of generations, and generations to come would pay the price as the plan was set in motion. Downard denotes the geographical, symbolical, and quantum coincidental nature, I didn't write this, I've copied this bit, of ritualistic slaying of the king, or JFK's assassination specifically. The first paragraph starts, "The power of the secret government over the news and media continues unabated." Bear in mind, these guys were writing books a long time ago.
Well, I would say that now, when they're saying the power of the secret government over news and media continues in a bit, they were probably a real small minority of people saying that. Whereas now, it's it's literally all propaganda, isn't it?
Yes. There was a little bit of freedom back then, weren't there?
Yeah. Well, you see interviews, don't you? Old interviews, and they were more of a chat, and they were
more of an interview,
more of a to and fro. Yeah. Now it's just sound bites.
Yes. I mean, I tend to agree with the writers. What is true and what is untrue is often blurred, as is what the word true or truth actually means. We're in a place today where we have to believe the truth via a controlled media. Fact checkers tell us the truth while ignoring any evidence. It's true because we say it's true, so it is. Now eat your breakfast type of thing.
And they've literally said that.
Yes.
Word for word.
Yeah.
Only our truth is the real truth kind of thing.
Yeah, they have said that, yeah.
Well, Ardern said it straight out of 1984, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. And that is what these guys were writing about all those years ago. So I tend to believe or look at what they say as serious information Whether I understand it or not is another thing.
Yeah.
Just like Downard's book, is it written in code? Is it a true story? Is it a bit of both? Is it some, warning us of the future, or what is it,
I don't know.
But it's certainly bonkers, and it's certainly a very interesting read.
Yeah.
Since the 1963 JFK ritual event, we've had quite a few other mind-altering, traumatic MK Ultra mass mind control events like RFK, Martin Luther King, Diana, and the whole nuke is going to bomb and kill us all during the Cold War era.
Well, don't miss out actually 9/11 and the recent nonsense.
The recent nonsense in 2020.
But they were the big ones for me, I would say, was JFK, Martin Luther King, Diana, you're right, 9/11.
Yeah.
They did alter, they were international, weren't they?
I mean, you could throw in Korea, you could throw in
There's a lot of
the Falklands and stuff like that.
Or as an actual significant murder of a human being or a bunch of human beings all at once.
Yeah. Instantly televised. Yeah. So anyway, just to wrap that up, King Kill 33 is a deep dive into the sacrifice of JFK, and both presented it as a high-level cult ritual murder. Two other influential people died on the 21st of the 11th, 1963. They also had a hand in the mass mind control of the world's population. They were the authors, C.S. Lewis of Narnia fame, who we'll come to further on, probably in episode 3, and Aldous Huxley. Following the JFK assassination, other important mind control mechanisms happened. A name was invented, more like inserted straight out of the Tavistock handbook. This brand name was shoved into the public domain and given to people who thought what the mainstream narrative was telling them was wrong or distorted. From that day onwards, anybody who questioned the narrative was labelled a conspiracy theorist. I think the name stuck. However, we now know that the term conspiracy theorist was probably thought well before 1963 and was a CIA construct. And like most of these things we experience, nothing is real. Everything either happens for a reason or is eventually taken over, even if it was started organically. But once the curtains are pulled back and we see the tricks being played out, unfolding before our very own eyes, there's no going back. How interesting that hidden behind the JFK trauma unfolding in Dallas that day, the man who wrote Brave New World would also die on the very same day. This book being a prerequisite to where we see ourselves now. Do you think there's there might well be, I'm not saying I'm the best read person in the world. Do you think there's a better book that explains what we're going through now than Brave New World, Chris? Or do you think it's bits of lots of other stuff put together? I know it's a big question.
I'd say it's a combo of that and 1984, but it's so clear now that they were put there on purpose and they're in schools on purpose. We're told to read them. There's loads of books. There might be more, that predict better things. Who knows? But for whatever reason, they're put on your lap when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And you read them, and they're still famous, and they're still. I mean, they're both very interesting books. You can't get away, but the way they predicted where we'd be now is kind of frightening.
Yes, it is. We're drugged out of his mind and enjoying our servitude.
Two versions, isn't it? You've got the fascist version, and then you've got the version where you're drugged out of your mind. And I think different countries probably experience different variations of those two, don't they?
Mm.
I think we've said before, I've always thought of the isms, like the communism, the capitalism, fascism, all of them, but they all test just to take bits and bats out of each of them. Like, for instance, in the previous nonsense, all different countries doing the same thing, but slightly different.
Yeah.
And then they could adapt, collect data to see where to go next from each country. Have they gone too far? Have they gone too soft, etc., etc.? Just a theory, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, JFK was shot and killed at 12:30 on that date. 60 minutes later, C.S. Lewis dropped dead. And then around 1720, Aldous Huxley dies. All three on the same day. For me, it has to mean something. I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
I just can't see that being a coincidence.
Three very influential people all dropping dead on the same day.
In their own ways. And some interesting stuff to talk about. I'm not going to go into JFK. there's bits about JFK at some points through this, but not necessarily about him. Just supporting stuff.
From where he was, from when that happened to now, and the word conspiracy theories was invented for it. Look where we are now. That was the starting of now, wasn't it? It stands to seem apparent that was the beginning of now.
That was the beginning of now. Yeah.
To set it up for the new world that they were trying to build.
Well, when you read a couple of the early guys that were talking about the JFK stuff, if you read their stuff now, I forgot the name now of one of the main guys, but anyway, if you read his stuff now, I'm not saying they knew everything then because they didn't, but most of what they said about the JFK thing was true.
Very early on, yeah.
Very early on.
You've got the fact that they've done this thing and it shocked everybody wherever. Maybe the conspiracy theorists, if you like, they were the ones that kept it alive and kept them talking about it.
Yeah. Just imagine, Chris.
Trying to forgetting about it.
In JFK, imagine the people that woke up in 2020 to realise, what we've been steadily waking up to over 20, 30 years or whatever. That would have been the same for them, wouldn't it?
But in a week or two.
Yeah, exactly. An instantaneous shock reaction. Yeah. Anyway, the story goes that Aldous Huxley, who was bedridden and dying, was scribbling on a writing tablet, not an iPad, a writing tablet with a pen, with the little strength that he had left, and asked his wife Laura to give him a 100 microgram dose of LSD. As she went to get the drug from a medicine cabinet, Laura was perplexed to see the doctor and nurses watching TV. She gave him a second dose a few hours later, and by 5:20, he had died. Laura later learned that the TV had been showing coverage of the assassination of JFK, who had been pronounced dead at 1 p.m. that day. So, a couple of things there. She went to get the drug from the medicine cabinet, like it would just Benylin. But another thing, he had doctors and nurses there at home, right? Not a doctor or a nurse, which is that in itself is odd, right? He wasn't in hospital. He had doctors and nurses at home. This shows where these people are. Who do you know with doctors and nurses at home?
Well, going back a few decades, even a doctor could be at your house, especially if you were dying.
What, watching TV?
That's what are they doing? Why is TV on? If someone's,
Are you watching TV while your wife's administering LSD to you?
I mean, that all, to be honest, even him having LSD on his deathbed, it all sounds like a bit of a story to me.
I mean, there is a letter that she wrote to, I think it was Julian Huxley, that I did try reading, but it was just a ramble about how he'd passed away. There's doctors and nurses at his home looking after and allowing his wife to administer LSD to him. So she walked past the doctors and nurses, didn't ask them whether she were all right administering LSD. She was just annoyed that they were watching TV. She didn't stop to ask them what they were watching, and he needed their help. Does it sound normal? Does it sound normal? That
no.
Either that or they were doing experiments on him. The murder of JFK was the post-war line in the sand kickstarting the 60s baby boomers' free love revolution, hippies and psychedelic flower power, drug use and LSD, MK Ultra, the age of Aquarius, the New Age movement, the Beatles, Vietnam, mass killings, Charles Manson, serial killers, Woodstock, free love and the pill, and CIA controlled women's rights like Gloria Steiner, and more and more and more. You could go on and on and on with all that stuff.
NASA.
And NASA, all these things that we could. That's endless. And you look at that and you think, that no wonder they say the 60s was a big decade. And I know it started before the 60s, probably into the 60s, but some interesting.
It seems to me, just looking at that list of stuff, you've almost got the beginning of. I'm not that it didn't always happen, but almost like the unveiling of. Like deceit and lies and paranoia and conspiracy. It's almost like it started there, isn't it?
That they wanted conspiracy to be in the vocabulary,
the lexicon, if you like.
Yeah.
And I was just saying to you today that some of the stories now, it's not just stories that are there to brainwash everybody. It seems like they're planting things in there now to get the conspiracy theorists, if you like, attention, to start them talking, which means we're doing the same as have I got everyone else for doing, which is just being brainwashed by TV.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Just in a slightly different parallel
Turn the
way.
thing off. I'm not interested. Turn it off.
No, but just a slightly parallel version of it.
Yeah, parallel version of it. Another interesting character was Timothy Leary, Professor Timothy Leary.
The energies that you run into when you take LSD, the visions that you get, are not supernatural and they're not pathological. These are ancient biological messages which are stored in your nervous system and in the cells of your body. When you take LSD, you go out of your mind. You go beyond words, you go beyond symbols, you go beyond the 20th century, because 99% of your brain doesn't know that you or the 20th century exists. Namaste. I salute the God within you.
The story goes that he was given the doors of perception by a colleague soon after returning from Mexico, where he'd first taken psilocybin mushrooms in the summer of 1960. He found that the doors of perception corroborated what he'd experienced and more. Leary set up a meeting with Huxley, and the two became firm friends. On May 19th, 1969, Leary announced his candidacy for the governor of California against Republican incumbent Ronald Reagan. On June 1st, 1969, Leary joined Lennon and Yoko Ono at their Montreal bed-in, and Lennon subsequently wrote Leary a campaign song called Come Together. Really? Incidentally, John and Yoko's bed-in were held in 1969. One protest was at Hilton Hotel, Amsterdam, and the other one at the historic Grand Hotel, Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal. The Fairmont Queen Elizabeth is more or less right next door. I looked it up on the map, and I'll be showing it now if you're watching this. Right next door to McGill University and its Allen Memorial Institute, that Ewan Cameron conducted the CIA's MKUltra experiments right there at that particular point in the 50s and 60s. And the Fairmont Queen Elizabeth and the Amsterdam Hilton are obviously owned by the Hilton Hotel Group, just like the Statler Hotel where Fred Olson decided he'd try and fly.
Right.
With LSD laced in him. Yeah. I mean, and the Hiltons have become synonymous, haven't they? What did you say yesterday, that she'd released the first...
Well, Paris Hilton, who no one had ever heard of, literally released the first sex tape, didn't she? Well, I'm not saying it's the first, but definitely one of them.
One of the most well known.
Well, I mean, what's the chances of a high-end family like that letting someone like that get out?
Well, there isn't, is there, unless they want it out.
Then we saw the same thing happen with those Kardashian witches.
Yeah, and Pamela Anderson.
Yeah.
Other participants in the sittings or bed-ins for peace were Aldous Huxley's friend Timothy Leary, who we mentioned, and we're going to come on to him. Huxley was actually a partner in several operations with Leary, which we'll go into in a minute. There were several others like DJ Murray Kaufman, an influential New York City rock and roll impresario and disc jockey in the 50s, 60s and 70s. During the early days of Beatlemania, he frequently referred to himself as the fifth Beatle. There's a few of them.
I'm not going to say that.
Kaufman attended the Peekskill Military Academy, a military boarding school. Notable alumni were Lyman Frank Baum, author best known for his children's books, particularly the wonderful Wizard of Oz. At the academy, there was a yellow brick road made of Dutch paving stones. Only one section remains, and this is thought to be the inspiration of the yellow brick road in Frank Baum's Oz books, including the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I would as I guess that yellow brick road is a bit more that dodgy speak that you talked about earlier, wouldn't you?
But what are these doing at these military schools at this time, Chris? I mean, there's writing about the Wizard of Oz, right, which has obviously got some sort of coding attached to it. You've got Jack Ruby slippers. I mean, when you're writing these things, you're not planning these out. I'm not putting Wizard of Oz in there because I think, Jack Ruby slippers, you know, and Oswald and things like that.
It just goes full circle.
It does. Another one of those people involved was Allen Ginsberg. who was one of the Beat Generation's literally subculture movement. The Beat Generation is a subculture movement started by authors, I think in the 50s, but they influenced the culture in America and politics, including the 60s hippie movement. One other interesting character in the bedding nonsense was an English guy called Derek Taylor, journalist, writer, publicist, record producer. He's best known for his role as press officer of the Beatles. He was also known as the fifth Beatle. How many of these fifth Beatles are there? Yeah. Why can't they have the fifth McCartney? He was head of publicity for the Beatles' Apple Corps company, publicist for California-based bands such as the Byrds, the Beach Boys, and the Mamas and Papas. Taylor went on to work for the newly launched UK record company WEA, later Warner Music Group. Taylor was known...
I've got to point out the Apple Corps.
Apple Corps, yeah.
Apple Corps. I mean, I'm sure most people know that, but that's beyond creepy. It's got to be.
Apple Corps. I know it's Apple Corps. It's just weird, isn't it? Again, you're coming back to these esoteric links, these threads that run through it all. Because, as we know, if you look back through ancient writings, I'm saying ancient, even the 1700s or 1600s, they used to spell things differently. So, different region would spell for argument's sake, as FOR, or the FOOR, or whatever, FORE, and that'd be the number and the word FOR for as well.
Even look at Yorkshire talk.
Yes.
In the old days, do you remember learning that song at school on Ilkley Mobar Tat?
Yeah.
Which was Yorkshire dialect. You had to be told what it meant.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, that's not ancient history, even, is it?
No, it isn't. So when you come to Apple Corps, although again coming back to this Twilight lingo, it sounds mad to us. In reality, we don't know because we don't speak that language. I mean, that might be nonsense, Apple Corps, or it could mean a Paul Corps. We don't know, do we?
No.
That's the fact. This Taylor guy was known for his forward-thinking and extravagant promotional campaigns. He came up with the taglines such as, "The Beatles are coming," and "Brian Wilson is a genius." That's of the Beach Boys. He was equally dedicated to the 1967 Summer of Love and helped organise and stage the Monterey Pop Festival, which a lot of people say, I've heard Crow, Mark Devlin, I think, say, and McGowan, that was the start of the Summer of Love, or it was a big part of the start of the Summer of Love, or it would put the Summer of Love on the map, or something like that. So to be the organizer of that and to come up with being the Beatles PR agent, you've got to be in on some stuff to be the Beatles PR agent. Those bands there were big bands. You can't just become their band's PR agent.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't go through the band jet fire.
Pardon? No, the Byrds, the Beach Boys, and the Mamas and Papas. I mentioned them earlier. You can't just become a publicist for those bands. And later, he's also bands, I think, part of the Rolling Stones and things like that.
But these are literally the Laurel Canyon bands that McGowan talked about, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. So you've got an English guy who was brought in by Brian Epstein in 1964 to manage the Beatles. Then he went on to manage all these bands that McGowan mentioned, and Mark Devlin's mentioned in his books, that kickstarted the hippie revolution, that all turned up, that all had military backgrounds, that all took the mind-controlling LSD that Timothy Leary and other people were just handing out like confetti.
Was Leary the guy who said drop out, tune in and drop out? I might have that wrong, but I think it was him, wasn't
it? Yeah. Taylor served as Director of Special Projects at Warner, whatever that means, working with artists such as the Rolling Stones, Yes, America, Neil Young, Carly Simon, Alice Cooper, and one other guy. Now, them bands alone, right? I'm not going to say the other guy in any second at the minute, right? Them bands alone there, right? And the other ones we just mentioned, is basically managing the biggest acts that were around at that particular point, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's not many other acts that are bigger than those people there we just mentioned. America.
Slightly different genres as well, because you've got Alice Cooper there.
Yes. But the one I missed out there was a guy called Vivian Stanshall. A Paul Corpse now starts making sense.
Yeah. I mean, why would he have all those massive acts and one that no one's really heard of?
And why would that be mentioned if nobody had really heard of it? You know, when you go through Wikipedia and all these things, they're telling you stuff. They want you to know these things. I'm not saying I just get my stuff from Wikipedia, but when they're on there in the mainstream, they're telling you these things because they want you to know it.
And just
they do make mistakes, but it's rarity.
Just in case no one knows who Vivian Stanshall is, he's the guy who
Mike Williams' research
points to the Paul McCartney of nowadays.
The PID, the Paul is dead stuff. He's the one that's saying is that his face altered and what have you.
I mean, that is, like I say, in itself is even just the fact that he's managing them same bands is...
Well, not only that, if he's managing Vivian Stanshall, for argument's sake, and Paul McCartney, and the PR around them, I mean, just that link there alone means that if there is something gone on with McCartney and Stanshall as a stand-in, that this close circle of people who are controlling the narrative, the words that are coming out, why wouldn't you have him doing that job?
Well,
That's your role.
You wouldn't have. They'd have to have the same manager because it's the same guy.
Yeah, you'd have to have the same guy. Yeah, you would. And Mike Williams also, he comes out. He said, I heard him say on. He did a podcast recently, and he said that people like the Stones had to know the secret.
Well, I wasn't going to mention.
Or he believes that. I don't know that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. But if anyone wants to look further into that, Mike Williams' stuff is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But he's also pointed out that something was going to happen around these next couple of days to do with a Paul Corpse, to do with Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And weirdly, just before we came on the show now, what day is it today? Is it 23rd?
The 23rd of February, 2023.
Yeah, and it's in the afternoon. And just before we came on here, because I thought I'm going to have a look and see if Paul McCartney's actually announced anything. Because his suspicion was maybe he's going to retire or maybe even pass away because he's quite old. So just before we came on, I Googled Paul McCartney today, if any news today, and he's announced that him and the Rolling Stones are making a record together.
Yeah.
So it's not what Mike Williams thought it might be, but that's quite a substantial thing when you think
it is, yeah.
The Beatles and Rolling Stones are supposedly enemmies all this time.
And also when you look,
sudden, he's keeping them relevant as well. He's putting Paul McCartney right back into the stratosphere again, and in the mix or whatever. But for what reason, I don't know. But
what was it John Lennon said? Paul's going to be bigger than Jesus or something like that.
Well, yeah, and then
Paul is Jesus.
Trouble for it.
Yeah. But also, when you look at it and you think, if Paul's Jesus, the Stones are the devil, which is what they were portrayed. Yeah.
Well, I think he
and
was
they're
saying,
coming together. What does that mean?
Yeah. I never thought.
What does that signify?
Yeah. I don't know if he was saying I think he said something like more people follow him than they did Jesus. I think that's what he was.
No, I think he actually said. He said more people follow the Beatles than Jesus, but he did actually say that he said more people follow the Beatles than God or something like, or the Bible. But he did actually say Paul is Jesus as well in a separate interview.
Right. Don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, a bit on Timothy Leary. As a clinical psychologist at Harvard University, they need to be psychologists. That's what we need. People doing this stuff.
And at Harvard University.
And at Harvard University. Psilocybin, or the psilocybin project. So he's got a psilocybin project. After revealing his experience with magic mushrooms in Mexico, he led the project from 1960 to 1962, testing the therapeutic effects of lysergic acid, dithymethylate, or LSD, and psilocybin, which were legal in the US. In the Concord prison experiment, I think we know where that's going to go, and the Marsh Chapel experiment, he was the guy leading these experiments. We've seen these experiments before on army personnel and things like that. And this is a brief synopsis of what they were. The Concord prison experiment, conducted from 61 to 63, was designed to evaluate whether the experience produced by the psychoactive drug psilocybin, derived from psilocybin mushrooms, combined with psychotherapy, could inspire prisoners to leave their antisocial lifestyles behind once they were released. So they give them psychotherapy as well as being off the napper. Yeah. The original study involved the administration of psilocybin manufactured by pharmaceutical company Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, now owned by Novartis, a World Economic Forum funder, the fourth largest by revenue in 2022, turning over $50 billion a year, to assist the group psychotherapy for 32 prisoners in an effort to reduce, obviously, these inmates coming back and being locked up again and reoffending. So they were conducting prison exams. I mean, they said there's 32 there. We don't know if there were 32 or 3,032. We don't know what there were, do we?
No, or 33.
Or 33. The Mars Chapel experiment, or experiments, also called the Good Friday experiment, was a 1962 experiment. In a double-blind experiment, half of the students received psilocybin, while a control group received a large dose of niacin, which is vitamin B3. Niacin produces clear physiological changes and thus was used to activate as an active placebo. In at least some cases, those who received niacin initially believed they had received a psychoactive drug. Now, if you've never taken niacin, niacin, you can take non-flush niacin, but niacin produces what is called niacin flush, where the skin flushes red. And I remember me and my wife had some, and I was taking all the B vitamins, and I had niacin. I didn't know about niacin flush. This was about 10 years ago. So we had some, right? And then we took the kids to, I forget where it were now, Sea World or whatever, right? And I was looking around at her and saying, do you feel a bit funky? She went, yeah. I didn't feel ill, but you went sort of red hot, your skin flushed, and it felt like you were having some sort of, you weren't hallucinating or anything like that, but it felt like something were happening. Yeah. It didn't last.
You're having an episode, aren't you? So
you're having an episode. So that's why they use that as an active placebo.
Good idea.
Good idea. If you're an evil psychiatrist who wants to
control freak.
Yeah. The experiments in psychology were conducted by Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. The founding board of the project was Leary, Dave McClellan, who was Leary and Alpert's superior at Harvard University, Frank Barron, Ralph Metzner, and Juan, Aldous Huxley, who were working on a project with mescaline. So Aldous Huxley here is right in Harvard, right? And he's on the board of directors, the founding board of these projects. And these projects remind me of MK Ultra projects, Coentyl Pro, that came out of these things where they were and had these LSD clinics in San Francisco, and where McGowan wrote his stuff, Operation Chaos, Operation Cauldron, where they're spraying people, the large area trials, the LAC trials, large area coverage trials. Then we have the Stanford prison experiments, the Ash conformity testing, all funded by NGOs, universities, governments, all permitted by government officials. Like that Frank Olson case where he would basically drove insane to fly out of a window. How many people have been? There's loads of stories of this stuff. How many people have been driven to this?
Well, I think the theory is he was thrown out that window. That's what his family is saying. Or
jumped out because he were given LSD.
Yeah, or...
Either way, it doesn't matter. He was thrown out, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he was killed.
So we've reached the end of episode 1 from part 1, Echoes of the Huxleys, of this Sheep Farm Meet the Flockers production. The whole series, as I said earlier, is called The Huxley's Brave New World Order. I don't know when this is going to end because it's the gift that keeps on giving. But next time we'll be discussing other oddities and loose ends attached to the Huxleys. Thanks for joining us on this first episode. It's probably gone on a bit longer than we expected, but there you go. That's what we do. That's how we rock and roll. Yeah, we always say that. But we'll join us next time in episode 2. Bye.